Chapter 58. Was it them? The old man asked slowly. Little Joseph had been beaten black and blue. He glanced at Han Jean and the others, and suddenly gritted his teeth and said, "No. It seems that if I don't teach you a lesson, you won't be honest." The old man took the whip from a mercenary and swung it hard. The crisp sound of the whip echoed in the air, and little Joseph was so scared that he trembled. "I'll give you one more chance. Was it them?" "No." The old man raised his whip and lashed it heavily on little Joseph's back without giving him any chance to protest. Little Joseph was in so much pain that tears and snot flowed down his face. He let out an ear-piercing scream. Children of his age usually hid under the wings of their parents. Even if he often fought with his companions, it was limited to fooling around. Little Joseph didn't know that this kind of whipping was so severe that he was on the verge of collapse. Chili yelled, "Why did you hit him?" The old man looked back at Chili with a creepy smile on his face. He then grabbed little Joseph's hair, but this time he changed the subject of his interrogation. "Tell me, what did you do yesterday? Tell me everything honestly." "Little Joseph was with us yesterday," Chili said angrily. "If you have anything to say, tell us. So many people bullying a child. Ha! You people from the Mercenary Association are too powerful." "That's right." The old man turned around and sneered. "Yesterday, a few people broke into the Morgan Merchant Guild and killed everyone inside. Our magicians did an investigation and found that the murderer used a very cruel method. First, they turned the people in the Merchant Guild into undead creatures, then killed them with magic similar to the Holy Light. If this kind of case happened outside the city, we wouldn't interfere. But in isolated Cliff City, we must find the murderer. This is our duty." The old man's gaze swept over them. "Do you have anything else you want to say?" "We did go to the Morgan Chamber of Commerce yesterday, but when we got there, the people there had already turned into zombies," Sasu said slowly. "You don't have to explain to me. My mission is to bring you to the judge. Then, you could try to persuade the judge." The old man waved his hand, and the surrounding mercenaries surrounded Han Jean and the others. Han Jean and the others shrank into a semicircle. This situation gave them a headache. If they encountered an enemy, then they could just fight with all their might. But now, they couldn't make a move, nor could they not make a move. After all, the other party represented the entire Mercenary Association. "Wait, I want to appeal to the isolated Cliff City and the Council of Elders," Chili yelled. "Appeal to the Joint Patriarch Society?" The old man laughed. Then his face turned cold. "Who do you think you are?" "As the successor of Morgan and Company, I have the right to appeal to the United Senate when I encounter injustice." Chili didn't lose to the old man at all. "Also, please watch your words. Who do you think you are?" The old man's expression changed. "What a joke. You say you are the successor of Morgan and Company, but do you have any proof? I can also say that I am the founder of Morgan and Company. Arrest them. Attention, you have violated the first and second laws of the Joint Patriarch Society. I will file a complaint against you." Chili's voice became louder and louder. She even raised a jade-like object. "This is the seal of Morgan and Company, and, as the successor of Morgan and Company, I have the right to immunity. You have no right to judge me." The faces of those mercenaries changed greatly. Apparently, the discussion mentioned by Keely had given them a lot of scruples. The earliest laws of isolated Cliff City were the cornerstone of the entire city. They couldn't be broken. Anyone who tried to subvert the laws would be severely punished, and those who broke the laws would be punished even more severely. No matter what crime I committed, I have the right to ask to see all the members of the Joint Patriarch Society. Now, please inform the Council of Patriarch Society." The old man hesitated for a moment, then forced a smile. "Okay, give me the seal. I will check it. Do you have a right?" Chili sneered. "You." The old man was so angry that his face turned red. But looking at the mercenaries around him, most of them had put away their weapons. It was unrealistic to order the mercenaries to arrest them by force. No one wanted to get involved in this mess. "Miss, aren't you deliberately making things difficult for us by doing this?" The old man's tone was obviously gentler. "At least, you should let us check the seal. Why don't you inform the Council of Patriarch Society?" Han Jin said indifferently. Whether the seal is real or fake, they should be the ones to check it, not you. The old man glanced at Han Jin, then turned his eyes back to Qi Li. Miss, there is no need to alert the Council of Patriarch Society. How about this? You can find something and stamp it, and then we will bring the pattern to the Council of Patriarch Society to verify. Is that okay? Qi Li was a bit hesitant. Han Jin smiled. Let me see. Then he reached out his hand to Qi Li. Qi Li took off the jade pendant and put it in Han Jin's hand. Han Jin played with the jade pendant. The pendant was silver-white in color and had exquisite workmanship. Both sides were engraved with countless flowing patterns. Han Jin took out a piece of paper from his space ring and handed it back along with the jade pendant. Miss Keeley held the jade pendant in her hand. A faint wave of magic came out, and the jade pendant became crystal clear. The moment the jade pendant touched the paper, Han Jin put the table knife in his hand into the paper and clamped it between the two. Morrison's and the others were covering for them. Apart from them, no one outside could see Han Jin's little trick. Qi Li glanced at Han Jin. The position of the table knife in Han Jin's hand was very clever. She could see that one part of the seal was missing, but to others, it was still a complete seal. Was he crazy? Did he want others to deny his identity? Qi Li was shocked, but in the end, she chose to trust Han Jin and handed the paper over. Stillberg, go. Give this to them, Han Jin said with a smile. The old man took the seal from Stillberg and looked at it carefully. He ordered, well, go to the Council of Elders and verify it. Go and come back quickly. Qi Li, no matter what happens later, don't be surprised. It's best if you hide behind Morrison's. Don't let anyone see your expression, Han Jin said softly. Qi Li answered in a low voice. Moxink pulled Cessation's arm on purpose, as if he was whispering something in his ear. Then he moved in front of Qi Li to protect her. Han Jin sighed slightly. When he interrupted, just now, the hatred in the old man's eyes had left a deep impression on him. This matter was not simple. Not long later, the mercenary named Will ran back, panting. He whispered something to the old man. The old man smiled. It fits perfectly. Seems like there was a misunderstanding today. I'm sorry. Are you Miss Qi Li? Hee. This is Morgan and Company's business. We won't interfere. Qi Li clenched her fists. An ominous feeling rose in her heart. Chapter 59. In the blink of an eye, the old man left with the people of the Mercenary Association, leaving little Joseph in the corner. They didn't care about such a small fry. Sunir and the others walked slowly into the hotel, one after the other. Han Jin was the last to enter. Before entering, he turned around and glanced back. Little Joseph's face was full of hesitation. After seeing Han Jin's look, he paused and quietly followed. What the hell is going on? Morrison's yelled. It's my fault. I was too careless. Han Jin said softly, but this isolated cliff city doesn't seem to be as good as you said. The seal is obviously not complete. Why? Why did they say it was complete? Qi Li asked in a trembling voice. There are many reasons. It's hard to say. The only thing I'm sure of is that he's up to no good. Han Jin thought for a moment. Maybe he's related to this matter, so he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. At least, he didn't want to attract the attention of the United Elders. Or maybe he likes your seal. Likes my seal? What does he want to do? Qi Li felt that her head was about to explode. Han Jin sighed and changed the topic. Little Joseph, do you know that old man? His name is Cromwell. He's a crazy old dog. Little Joseph said, gnashing his teeth. What does he do in the Mercenary Association? He's an inspector. He has a lot of power, Morrison said in a muffled voice. And he's a 9th grade professional. You haven't told me why he wants my seal. Qi Li screamed. Before today, she had never told anyone about the secret of the seal. Everyone only thought that it was an accessory that Qi Li always carried with her. In fact, Qi Li didn't distrust her friends. It was just that the significance of the seal was too great. If he has the seal, he can find someone to pretend to be the successor of Morgan and Company, or win the trust of the United Elders. It's not that important, is it? Sassu continued. Have you forgotten what happened in the 11th town? Now that Morgan and Company doesn't even trust Chi Li, what's the use of a seal? At least, he has a justifiable reason to kill and plunder. What happened in the Holy Crown City should have been spread out. Han Jin smiled. Who do you think killed those people? You mean? Sasu was shocked. Just then, the door was pushed open. Little Joseph, who was standing at the door, was caught off guard. He screamed and fell to the ground. He had just been whipped, and the door of the hotel hid his wound, causing him to curl up in pain. Following that, a person rushed in. Everyone get ready. Little guy, are you all right? I'm fine. Little Joseph struggled to get up. Sylvia quickly forgot about this little accident. She excitedly gestured and shouted, Quick, get ready. I'll take you to make a fortune. What kind of fortune? I've just received a task. You haven't received a task to hunt demon beasts, have you? Morrison's face changed greatly and hurriedly interrupted Sylvia. Do you think I'm as stupid as you? Sylvia rolled her eyes at Morrison's and proudly said, I've received a task to escort a caravan. I'll send 15 carriages with armor and weapons to the Holy Crown City. I can earn 300 gold coins just by walking. 300 gold coins. This time, everyone's face changed. Morrison's pounded on the table and stood up. Are you crazy? The Holy Crown City is at war. You want to send 15 carriages with armor and weapons there? War? You don't know? Why is there a war? Silner asked in a sobbing voice. Nonsense. The war has been going on for almost half a year. Sylvia turned around and rushed out. Morrison sat down on the chair and sighed. Apparently, he was worried about Sylvia. Sasu, if someone is watching us, can you find them with magic? Han Jin asked in a low voice. I've mastered the clairvoyance eye, but I can't maintain it for too long. You mean someone is watching us? Sunir asked. I don't know. If that old guy named Cromwell really wants to get the seal of Morgan and Company, he must have sent someone to watch us. Han Jin stood up and walked to little Joseph. He patted him on the shoulder and whispered something to him. Little Joseph suddenly raised his head and stared at Han Jin blankly. Han Jin said a few more words. Little Joseph hesitated for a long time and nodded. Then Han Jin gave little Joseph a dozen gold coins. Little Joseph hurried out of the hotel. Where did the little guy go? Sasu asked. To make some arrangements in advance, in case of any accidents. Han Jin smiled. I was deceived by you. I thought this isolated cliff city was a paradise. Otherwise, I wouldn't be so passive now. I was also deceived. Sunir laughed. Morrison's, you grew up here. Sasa said, Don't you know isolated cliff city? I never said it was a paradise. Morrison's replied sullenly. Otherwise, why would I go to another place? Of course. For you, anywhere is not a paradise as long as Sylvia is here. Sasa laughed. The heavy atmosphere was slightly relieved. They all laughed and chatted softly. After a while, Sylvia walked into the hotel dejectedly and looked at Morrison's blankly. What should we do? The caravan refused to terminate the contract. I've already mortgaged our house to the Mercenary Association. What should we do? It's your house, not ours. Morrison said coldly. 15 carts of weapons and armor, and only one house is enough? You've also mortgaged other things, haven't you? You. Sylvia was very angry when she heard the first part of the sentence, but when she heard the second part, she became dejected again. That, the scorching staff, I've mortgaged it to the Mercenary Association. Morrison's gave a hollow laugh and turned his head to look at the other side. When is the departure time in the contract? Han Jin suddenly asked. Tomorrow. We'll help you. Han Jin laughed. Don't worry, I have a way to send the goods there. Really? Sylvia cried in surprise and joy. Sunir and the others were dumbfounded. This kind of thing could not be solved by any tricks. The three lords were killing each other, and countless armies were roaming and fighting in the vast wilderness. If the caravan went there, it would be like walking into a trap. Not to mention, the Holy Crown City was at a disadvantage, surrounded by the armies of Black Raven City and Depew City. Of course it's true. You go back and prepare. Han Jin laughed. We'll go to you together in the evening. That's good. Sylvia's mood changed quickly, and she was easy to trust. She stared at Morrison's to show off, and then left the hotel triumphantly. You're not serious, are you? Morrison's cried. Don't worry. Han Jin said softly. Sooner, you go outside and see if anyone is secretly watching us. Sasu, you also use your clairvoyance eyes. Chapter 60. Early in the morning, a fleet of carriages quietly drove to the south gate of Isolated Cliff City. Isolated Cliff City was a city that never slept, and it was a neutral city that stayed out of the Continental War. Its commerce was flourishing, so the city gate was always open. There were no guards at the gate, which fully reflected the style of a free trade city. A thin figure greeted the carriages and asked loudly, Sir, are you there? Here. Han Jin lifted the curtain. Come on in. Little Joseph nimbly jumped into the carriage. Han Jin, Sasu, and the other men were all in the carriage. Sasu saw that little Joseph was carrying a bag on his back and asked with a smile, Little Joseph, what did you bring? I brought everything I can, little Joseph said in a low voice. Why? Are you going to? He has to come with us, or the Mercenary Association won't let him go. Han Jin smiled. Little Joseph, have you done what I asked you to do? Yes. Little Joseph nodded. What did you ask him to do? Sasu asked curiously. Put up posters. Han Jin chuckled. Last night, little Joseph used the gold coins Han Jin gave him to hire some friends to put up hundreds of posters in every corner of the city. The posters were all about Inspector Cromwell of the Mercenary Association, exposing how Cromwell had plotted to steal money from Morgan and Company, and how he had killed Morgan and Company's men in extremely cruel ways. After learning that Miss Chi Li, the heir of Morgan and Company, had come to Isolated Cliff City, he had tried to steal the seal from Chi Li's hands. At the end, they added a few sentences in large font, saying that Cromwell would destroy all the posters in order to cover up the truth. In fact, this was nonsense. Whether the content was true or not, the posters would be torn up anyway. But for ordinary people, the actions of the Mercenary Association actually increased the credibility of the posters, and the content would spread faster. It's useless. After listening to little Joseph, Sasu shook his head. We lack the corresponding evidence. I don't expect to put Cromwell on trial. Han Jin said indifferently. As long as he doesn't dare to do anything during this period of time, I'll be satisfied. My great prophet, what should we do next? Morrisons have been holding back for a long time. Do you really think we can get through the blockade and escort this convoy to the Holy Crown City? Han Jin looked outside and whispered, What will happen if this fleet is discovered by the people of Black Raven City? Do you even need to ask? Everything will be confiscated and everyone will be killed. It's that simple. The people in the caravan will be killed too. They aren't gods. Why shouldn't we kill them? Compared to the goods in the fleet, how much are Sylvia's house and the scorching staff worth? Morrison's calculated carefully in his mind. Although Sylvia's house is in the center of the city, where every inch of land is very expensive, it's still too little compared to the whole fleet of 15 carriages of weapons and armors. Even with the scorching staff, it's still less than 1/5 of the value of the whole fleet. That is to say, no one will take the mortgage seriously. The merchants are more afraid of accidents than we are. Well, Morrison's was stunned. Think about it. Do they look nervous? A fat guy appeared in Morrison's mind. His name was Leopold, and he was the person in charge of the entire caravan. He was kind, amiable, always smiling, and easy to talk to. Morrison's went to him late last night and asked him to leave the Isolated Cliff City the next morning. Leopold agreed without hesitation. Let's put it this way. They know that the Holy Crown City is at war, but they still transport the military supplies there. They must have something to rely on. Han Jin said in a low voice. That's not right. Since they have something to rely on, why don't they tell us? That's the only way we can cooperate. Morrison's cried. I don't know about that, unless they are willing to tell us. Seeing that Morrison's was arguing with him again, Han Jin wisely shifted his target to someone else. The journey was surprisingly peaceful. Nothing happened, but Han Jin and the others didn't dare to take it lightly. Analysis was one thing, but it was always right to be careful. After a whole month, the caravan gradually approached the ruling area of the Holy Crown City. The atmosphere became inexplicably tense. During this month, Han Jin absorbed thousands of yuan of energy every day. The magic crystals he bought in the isolated cliff city provided him with a solid guarantee. In fact, he had deliberately forgotten his master's warning and the serious consequences caused by absorbing the magic crystals of the Black Ravens. Because he was so anxious, he didn't care about anything else except for the insurmountable limit of 1%. Strictly speaking, before the completion of the Great Foundation, he was not a qualified cultivator. He couldn't even perform middle-grade Taoist magic arts. Thanks to the distinct elemental rules of this continent, he could make talismans such as the 5 Ghost transferring technique. Now, the energy flowing in his body didn't completely belong to him. Therefore, he couldn't replenish it by himself. Only after the completion of the Great Foundation could the energy in his body be refined into the Qi of the Great Void. The difference between before and after was like that of a pheasant and a phoenix. Regular cultivators, at the beginning, used methods such as respiration and other methods to consolidate their corporeity. However, Han Jin started by absorbing grain essence. But different roads led to the same destination. People were the same. The Xian acupoints needed to be opened to open the great circulation were the same, and the great circulation represented the ability to operate the Qi of the Great Void. At this point, Han Jin was on the same starting point as the regular cultivators. But he had double advantages. In addition to the normal respiration and respiration, he could still absorb the energy from food. It was just that he had one more step to refine it. Of course, the previous situation was very difficult. In that world, Han Jin hid under his master's wings and kept a low profile deliberately. He never challenged the tacit understanding and rules between the world of cultivation and the secular world. The reason was that he couldn't afford it. Others could recover after a short respiration after throwing out 10 fire talismans, but he couldn't, unless the fire talismans he threw out could be exchanged for huge benefits. Then he could use them when he needed to. What made Sunir and the others dumbfounded was that Han Jin suddenly had a great interest in fighting power and magic. As long as he was free, he would ask for advice from Morrison's and Sasu. This was the characteristic of Han Jin's cultivation. The absorption of energy was the center of everything, and the countless Taoist methods he had mastered were equivalent to countless paths. He could follow any path to the end, and he could even switch from one path to another during the process. However, Han Jin only learned magic for a few days, and then he threw Sasu aside. The power of magic couldn't be compared with that of Taoist magic arts, at least for beginner-level magic. Chapter 61. At dusk, they pitched a camp beside a river. Han Jin had never been here before, but he was familiar with the name of the river. It was the Shui River, the place where he washed off the filth on his body for the first time since he came to this world. But now, they were at the downstream of the river. Dozens of miles up along the Shui River, they would reach Radon Town. The guards of the caravan picked up a lot of twigs and lit several bonfires. Han Jin and the others gathered together, discussing which direction to take tomorrow. They were about to enter the war zone, so of course, they had to be extra careful. While Han Jin and the others were talking happily, the head of the caravan, Leopold, just smiled and said nothing, as if what they were discussing had nothing to do with him. At the moment when the sun jumped into the horizon, Sunir's expression suddenly became stiff, and then she jumped up from the ground. There are hoofs. Lots of hoofs. Where? Han Jin was surprised. Over there. Sunir pointed to the east, and then took off the longbow from her back. Don't be nervous, everybody. Leopold stood up and looked to the east, and then said with a smile, they should be on our side. On our side? Where, Leopold, what do you mean? Morrison's asked in a low voice. Ho ho, we have discussed with General Quincy of the Holy Crown City, and he will meet us nearby. Leopold laughed, and then pointed to the others. You guys go and see if they are on General Quincy's side. Several guards jumped on the horses and quickly rode out of the camp. Sunir and the others looked at each other. Since the owner of the goods was not nervous, there was no need for them to be nervous. Morrison's took a deep look at Han Jin. He remembered clearly that Han Jin had said a few days ago that the caravan must have something to rely on since they dare to transport military supplies to the Holy Crown City, and General Quincy should be their reliance. Get up, get up, Leopold shouted loudly. We can't camp here today. Let's hurry up tonight. Han Jin and the others also began to pack up. The bonfires were put out, the unloaded carriages were reassembled, and everyone was ready to set out. Not long after, a row of black shadows appeared on the horizon, galloping towards them at a very fast speed. When hundreds of night arrived, everything was ready. Oh, it's Lord Mario. Leopold smiled and walked over. Long time no see. You are getting more and more energetic. How many goods are here this time? A young knight came out of the crowd. 15 carriages, 150 sets of heavy armors, and 2,000 long swords. Great! That young knight clapped his hands and laughed. Hundreds of knights gave way to them, and the carts carrying the goods slowly passed through them. Han Jin and his companions stayed where they were. It was a courtesy for both sides to get in touch with each other. If they were needed to escort the carts, they would follow them. After all, this was not the Holy Crown City. If they were not needed, they could go back as long as Leopold signed the contract. However, Leopold glanced back at them, revealing a sinister smile, and walked out. No one could imagine that such a kind and amiable person like Leopold could show such a chilling expression. Put down your weapons. The young knight suddenly put on a serious face. What? Han Jin, who stood in the front, was stunned. I'll say it again. Put down your weapons at once. That young knight shouted. Han Jin's facial muscles twitched involuntarily. He stared at that young knight, who should be about 23 or 24 years old. He was handsome, but his face was too pale. There were dark circles and bags under his eyes, which should be caused by his unrestrained nightlife. What Han Jin focused on was the look in the man's eyes, which contained ridicule and contempt, but not a trace of kindness. What are you doing? Sylvia rushed up. Are you mistaken? We are mercenaries. Mercenaries who are responsible for escorting the goods. I know, but we don't need you now. That young man's eyes lit up, and his tone was a little soft. So, do as I say. Why should we put down our weapons? One of the warriors shouted. They were all members of the Burning Rose mercenary group, and the leader of the group was Sylvia. In Morrison's words, Sylvia liked to fool around since she was young. The so-called mercenary group was just a toy. Naturally, one could imagine the level of the mercenary group. Other than Sylvia, the other 5 or 6 people were all warriors. Because of this, the young knight's face turned cold. He waved his hand lightly, and a few arrows shot out from behind him. The warrior who spoke rudely was sent flying a few meters away. The arrows were still vibrating violently on his body. Although he didn't bleed much, it was obvious that he wouldn't survive. Loon! Loon! Sylvia screamed and rushed forward. It seems that you don't want to cooperate. The young knight sighed, and his fingers were already on his sword. Han Jin and the others looked at each other. Although they didn't know why, they knew what kind of situation they would be in if they put down their weapons. They quickly exchanged silent words through their eyes. Sasu was the first to throw his wand to the ground. Sunir took down her longbow and slowly bent down. Morrison still didn't move, as if he hadn't made up his mind. Han Jin suddenly turned around and shouted, Miss Chi Li, you have to help us. Those guys are too unreasonable. Chi Li? The young knight was stunned. He was very familiar with this name, but he couldn't remember it at the moment. At this time, Han Jin moved away half of his body, and the young knight could only see a small part of Chi Li's face. He was stunned for a moment, and then he urged his horse to move forward a few steps. When he confirmed that it was Chi Li's face, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. He turned around and was about to give an order, but unfortunately, he only saw a wall of earth rise up. Morrison's roared and jumped into the air like lightning. He held his greatsword with both hands and swung it down with all his strength. The bright light of the sword left a shadow in the air, like an inverted curtain of stars. Morrison's was tall and sturdy, and he held a frightening greatsword in his hand. He always gave his enemies the illusion that he was a warrior who was used to using strength to defeat his opponents. In fact, He was known for his speed, and now that he had broken through the bottleneck, he closed in on the young knight in an instant. The young knight was shocked, and he pulled out his long sword as fast as he could to block Morrison's attack. Boom! If there was a considerable gap in strength, the battle between warriors would often be decided very quickly, just like when Morrisons fought with the gladiators in the 11th town. The young knight let out a shrill scream. He could block Morrison's sword, but he couldn't block Morrison's sword light. A bright band of blood was slanted from his forehead to his left cheek. It was made up of countless blood spots, and his left eye couldn't open. Morrison's sword light wrapped in the bright starlight had turned the young knight into a pockmark, or even a one-eyed man. Chapter 62. Sunir shot an arrow at the young knight. The arrow pierced through the young knight's chain mail and went deep into his shoulder. The mud wall could not stop the knights, but bought them enough time. When the knights broke through the mud wall, they saw Morrisons with a sinister smile on his face. Morrisons had his sword pressed against the young knight's neck. A middle-aged knight raised his arm and stopped the commotion. He stared at Morrisons with cold eyes. His murderous intent seemed to be able to penetrate a person's body. Unfortunately, Morrisons was a typical desperado. He was really stupid. Even if he saw a dragon, he would still dare to attack it. A few hundred knights were nothing to him. Morrison spat on the ground. He grabbed the young knight and slowly backed away. Sassu had already picked up his magic wand. He finished chanting a spell. Following his hand gesture, a swamp appeared between them and the knights. However, his magic was limited. A swamp was too small compared to a few hundred knights. The knights on both sides slowly surrounded them. "Get out of the way, or I'll kill him," Morrison said coldly. The knights all looked at the middle-aged knight. However, the middle-aged knight was like an iceberg. His expression and eyes did not change at all. "Tell them to get out of the way." Morrisons lightly slashed the young knight's neck with his sword. "Get out of the way! Get out of the way! This is an order," the young knight screamed. "I'm sorry, sir. This is the only way to ensure your safety," the middle-aged knight said coldly. "Leave sir here, and I'll let you go. F*CK off." Morrison sneered. "Where are we supposed to go if we leave him here? Do you think we're children? I'll count to 3. If you don't get out of the way, I'll cut off one of his hands. 1. The middle-aged knight paused and slowly raised the sword in his hand. Hundreds of knights held their knight spears in an extremely orderly manner and formed a charging formation, expressing a feeling of tit-for-tat. 2. Morrisons was not afraid at all. He gripped his greatsword tightly and counted to 3. If the knights did not move aside, he would cut off the young knight's hand without hesitation. At this moment, Sylvia suddenly got up. She stared at the back of the young knight with hatred. She suddenly unsheathed her greatsword, which was not inferior to Morrison's, and slashed at the young knight. Sylvia was a person who dared to love and hate. She was relatively simple-minded, especially after witnessing the tragic death of her comrade. Other than revenge, she would not think of anything else. Of course, this was very foolish of her. Sassu, Sunir, and even Morrisons were shocked. The middle-aged knight on the other side was even more shocked. However, no one could stop Sylvia's actions. Morrisons could not move. There are dozens of archers hidden among the knights, and he was facing a high-grade knight. As long as his sword left the hostage's throat, he would not be able to control what would happen next. Sunir was also helpless. She could not hurt her comrade. As for hitting Sylvia's longsword, that was even more impossible. Even a high-grade ranger would not be able to do it, let alone Sunir. A wooden puppet that was half a head taller than Morrison's appeared out of thin air. It used its body to block Sylvia's sword, and then punched Sylvia in the chest. Sylvia was knocked back a few steps. Her body bent into a ball, and she could not stop retching. Hanjin's wooden puppet was much smaller in size. Although the Dryad's material was not inferior to the 1,000-year-old peach wood, its large size had many shortcomings. Its defense was not good, and Morrison's, who was now a 7th-grade fighter, could easily destroy the wooden puppet with a dozen strikes. Of course, Morrison's movements were too agile, and he was always attacking from behind the wooden puppet. Therefore, Hanjin was very angry and made a lot of changes. The power of the talisman was limited. It could cover and affect wooden puppets that were more than 6 meters tall, and it could cover and affect wooden puppets that were close to 2 meters tall. Undoubtedly, Han Jin was the calmest person in the field. He had been observing everyone's movements. When Silner waved her long sword, the middle-aged knight's face had turned pale. Although the whole process was extremely short, Han Jin had seen it clearly, which made him feel more confident. Han Jin slowly walked up and knocked off the hostage's helmet. The table knife in his hand stopped in front of the hostage's right eye. If something really happens to this person, I think you will be severely punished, right? Han Jin said calmly. I have an idea. I will stay here with this person, and you let my companions go. Morrison's body trembled. He hurriedly said, No, don't talk nonsense, Han Jin said softly. Do as I say. The middle-aged knight looked up and down at Han Jin. You're a puppeteer? That has nothing to do with you. Han Jin's tone was not polite. Now, you just need to tell me if you accept my suggestion. Fine. Let them go. The middle-aged knight shouted. No, if we leave together. Sasu took a step forward. He was just as excited as Morrison's. Although he had seen many things during his travels, his blood was not cold. He was still very young, and when it was time to be excited, he did not lack courage. Either you leave, or none of us leave. Which one do you choose? Han Jin said calmly. Morrison's and the others were speechless. Although Han Jin's words were true, they could not accept these two choices. Don't waste time. If I tell you to leave, then leave. Han Jin's gaze fell on the middle-aged knight. I want 30 horses. The middle-aged knight gritted his teeth and shouted, Give them the horses. About 30 knights jumped off their horses and angrily led their mounts to the side. Sunir suddenly said, Listen to him. After that, she had already walked over and jumped onto a horse. With Sunir as an example, Morrison's, Sisu, and the others lowered their heads and walked over. Sylvia moved closer to Han Jin and whispered, You can go. Leave him to me. The wooden puppet's punch had woken up Sylvia. She understood how stupid her actions were. Moreover, she was the one who had accepted this mission, and she was the one who had caused this disaster. She wanted to make up for it. You guys go. I'll stay, Han Jin said calmly. Damn it. Are you trying to cause trouble for us? I'm talking to you. Morrison's roared angrily. Sylvia was stunned. She did not expect Morrison's to scold her in front of so many people. However, when she thought about the consequences, she stomped her feet and burst into tears. Then she walked forward. After a while, everyone had mounted their horses, and each of them had a spare one. Everyone's attention was focused on Han Jin. The others were fine, but Stillberg was trembling. In the end, he squeezed out a cry and said, Master, go. Chapter 63. Sunir and the others spurred their horses on and soon disappeared into the twilight. The middle-aged knight waited patiently for a moment, then slowly said, Can you let go of our lord now? Dismount. Han Jin smiled. The middle-aged knight took a deep breath, then made a gesture, and all the other knights jumped down from their horses. Now, kill your horses, Han Jin added. You? The middle-aged knight's eyes shone with a cold light. Han Jin spun the table knife in his hand briskly, then returned it to the hostage. This was no longer the table knife Sunir had used before. Han Jin had sharpened the knife to an extremely sharp point. The slender tip of the knife was only a few millimeters away from the hostage's eyes. If the hostage blinked, his eyelashes would touch the tip of the knife. The feeling of being stabbed was terrifying. The hostage knew where the sharp pain was coming from, and also knew that something had fallen, but he didn't dare to look, scream, or move. All he could do was endure the pain and sit there like a statue. Han Jin's hand was extremely firm, as if it was frozen in the air. I like to be straightforward, and I never repeat myself. The middle-aged knight grunted, then raised his sword and stabbed it into the neck of the horse. The horse screamed and jumped up. Its body spun half a circle, then fell to the ground. Blood gushed out along with foam. Hundreds of murderous gazes focused on Han Jin, but it didn't affect Han Jin in the slightest. Then, one by one, The horses were stabbed by their own masters, and the mournful cries resounded through the sky. "Now is this enough?" The middle-aged knight said word by word. "Wait." Han Jin suddenly became a man of few words. The middle-aged knight looked at Han Jin carefully. The more he looked at him, the more frightened he became. Han Jin's smile was very gentle and kind, but the hatred in his eyes was like a raging wave beating the shore, suffocating him. It was reasonable to say that Han Jin's cultivation shouldn't have made the knights feel oppressed. This was because of his origin. In order to protect his primordial spirit from dispersing in the endless space-time turbulence, his spiritual power had been tempered beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Although he looked calm on the surface, his heart was in extremely fierce conflict. There was a thing called impression. For example, when you used a mobile phone for the first time, drank a kind of wine for the first time, or ate a dish for the first time, if it left a bad impression, you might not try it again in your lifetime. Han Jin's impression of this world was extremely bad. Chaos, no rules, the destruction of Radon Town, the bad businessman George in the 11th town, the soldiers he met on the way, the mercenary association in isolated Cliff City, and now all these things had made him unable to bear it. He had never wanted to destroy anything so much since he was sensible. Maybe, for a person who was used to being submissive, all these things were nothing, but Han Jin couldn't. His experience had determined that his patience was limited. In that world, there were also all kinds of deceit and oppression. But after all, it was a civilized era, and deceit and oppression were all for profit. If there was no profit as the premise, ordinary people would not easily hurt others. But here it was a mess. Naked robbery, bullying, and even killing were everywhere. Therefore, Han Jin felt extremely disgusted. But the middle-aged knight didn't know what kind of change Han Jin had completed, nor what kind of road he had forced Han Jin to walk on. He was always trying to rescue the hostages. "Brother, put down your weapon now. I promise I won't hurt you. I can swear. How long do you want us to wait? This is your last chance. I hope you can cherish it. Brother, do you know who Lord Mario is? He is a noble, he is." Despite the middle-aged man's incessant chatter, Han Jin remained motionless. His hand and the knife were firm, but the hostage seemed to be unable to stand it any longer. Large beads of sweat kept dripping down from his forehead. The strangest thing was that his body was trembling slightly, but his head remained motionless. Obviously, he was trying his best to control himself. The difficulty of this posture should be close to 100 points. Just when the middle-aged knight stopped trying to persuade Han Jin suddenly said, "Tell me, why did you attack us? And tell those archers to put away their bows. I'm easily nervous, and once I'm nervous, I'll do something wrong. Don't push me." The middle-aged knight waved his hand, motioning the archers to put away their bows. Then he pondered for a moment and smiled bitterly. "This is not the first caravan." "What do you mean?" Han Jin asked coldly. "How should I put it? When our caravan buys military supplies in the isolated Cliff City, we will spread the news that we will send the supplies directly to the Holy Crown City." The middle-aged knight said slowly, "In fact, they will send the supplies here, and then we will send them to the Holy Crown City through other channels. Brother, we don't mean to embarrass you, but we will never let this news spread out. If people from the Black Raven City and the Depew City hear about it, we will. If so, why do they hire us? Brother, we have to pretend, otherwise it will arouse suspicion. Besides, it's not safe on the road. If we encounter bandits, we will be in trouble. More than that," Han Jin sneered, "when the caravan returns to the isolated Cliff City, they will find the Mercenary Association and say that the mission failed and the hired mercenaries were killed. In this way, they can take the deposit as their own. Anyway, the mercenaries are all dead, and no one will argue with them. It's a good idea. Even if those merchants don't want to earn your money, the deposit alone will be enough to attract them to continue their work." The middle-aged knight's face changed greatly, and a killing intent flashed in his eyes. In fact, it was unnecessary. Without these words, he would never let Han Jin go back alive. Han Jin looked at the sky, which was getting darker and darker. "Well, you all kneel down." The middle-aged knight clenched his teeth and took the lead to kneel down. He didn't dare to disobey, so he could only follow the other party's order to numb the other party. If they pushed too hard, the other party would have the idea of dying together with them, and then they would be miserable. If I let you go now, will you come to hurt me again? Han Jin smiled. No, no. The hostage was so moved that he almost cried. He came here just to earn some military merits, but he didn't expect to encounter such a thing. Hearing that he would be free soon, he almost fainted. Keep your promise. Han Jin patted the hostage's head and suddenly pushed it forward. With a thud, the table knife pierced deeply into the hostage's eye. The middle-aged knight roared with his eyes wide open, no. Then he threw out his long sword. Chapter 64. Under hundreds of murderous gazes, Han Jin's figure suddenly shrank back into the ground, like an unfortunate person who had fallen into a swamp. The long sword that was shooting at him passed over Han Jin's head and flew straight into the distance. Ha! A chuckle. This was Han Jin's last gift to them. However, all the night felt a chill run down their spines. There was no need to express it clearly. At the same time, they realized that this matter was not over and would not be over. What kind of magic is this? A knight exclaimed. What the F***ck are you all standing there for? Get up, get up. The middle-aged knight roared and jumped up. Chase forward. Quick. Sir, shouldn't we send someone to report to the general? If you want to die, then go back. The middle-aged knight gritted his teeth and staggered to the side of the hostage. The table knife had been deeply stabbed into the hostage's eye socket. This kind of injury was incurable. The middle-aged knight thought of his future and his family. He could not help but look up to the sky and howl. Ah! The night wind swept through the gloomy forest. The faint starlight poured down and covered the earth with a layer of cold coat, as if to remind the world that winter was coming. Large patches of withered yellow wormwood swayed weakly. It seemed that they could not bear the desolation of the end of autumn. A figure came out of the wormwood. His appearance was very abrupt. To be exact, he came out of the ground. Han Jin used to be very gentle and gentle. Now, he had turned into an unsheathed sharp blade. Although he still had that kind of harmless smile on his face, his eyes had become very dark. They were emitting a faint cold light in the night wind, like two gems from hell. Han Jin looked around and rushed to the main road that was full of ruts and hoofprints. He observed for a moment and then rushed to the north. In the process of running, Han Jin drew a few strokes in the air at an extremely fast speed and shouted in a low voice, "Quick!" Han Jin's momentum suddenly changed. Every time the tip of his foot touched the ground, his entire body would shoot out like an arrow, shooting out 7 to 8 meters away. His speed would decrease as he fell, and then the tip of his foot would touch the ground again, turning into a sharp arrow. Murderous intent surged in his chest. Since this world tried to stop him, hurt him, and even kill him without any scruples, then he didn't need to have any scruples. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This would become his principle. Han Jin was not an impulsive person. He would always think twice before doing anything. The 4 earth-meld talismans that he had made using the large amount of earth element he had absorbed over the past 30 days were the magical treasures he relied on to escape. He had already used one just now, so he still had 3 more chances to escape. He was not afraid. Han Jin's body was like a flying kite. Although there was a slow process at the end, his overall speed was not much slower than a free galloping horse. The caravan was loaded with armor and weapons, and the ruts were very deep. As a former private detective who was good at finding all kinds of clues, he wouldn't lose track of them even if he closed his eyes. After an unknown amount of time, a winding black line jumped into his eyes. Han Jin steadied himself and observed the surrounding situation. Then, he plunged straight into the wilderness. The people in the caravan didn't realize the danger. They were still talking and laughing in low voices. Some were talking about how much they could earn from this trip, while others felt pity for the 2 women because they didn't have the chance to play with them. After playing with them, there was nothing to feel sorry about. Han Jin crouched in the grass, waiting for the caravan to pass by. He knew who the guards were talking about: Chi Li and Sylvia. Their obscene and teasing tone made his killing intent more intense. The first carriage approached Han Jin. Han Jin quietly took out a wooden army charm. When he was about to release it, he suddenly froze. He crouched on the ground and felt a slight vibration. Was a night coming? More than 20 carriages passed in front of Han Jin in a line. Han Jin first tightened his cuffs, trousers, and lapels. Then, like a fish in water, he quietly approached the last carriage and hid under it. Holding the shaft with both hands and feet, he clung to the bottom of the carriage. The effect of the levitation spell was still in effect. His body was as light as a swallow, and he didn't need to exert any strength at all. Soon, he could hear the clear sound of horses' hoofs, which became louder and louder. The caravan stopped by the roadside one after another. A moment later, Han Jin heard Leopold's voice. "General Quincy, why did you come here in person? Where's the boy Mario? Is he not with you?" A deep voice replied. "No, he should still be dealing with those mercenaries." Leopold laughed. "What? Is it very troublesome over there?" The deep voice sounded very surprised. "Not troublesome. Only one fighter." Leopold laughed evilly. "There are 2 women in that team of mercenaries." "Ha ha! Lord Mario won't let them go." "This boy—" The deep voice paused for a moment. "No, I'm still worried. General, Lord Mario is leading a few hundred knights. Looking at the time, it should be about time. If something happens, we'll all be doomed. Let's go." The deep voice said, "This area is very safe. I won't send anyone to escort you, but you'd better hurry up. The Lord has urged me several times. The battle over there is very fierce, and we need to replenish our forces urgently. By the way, how many magic crystals did you bring this time?" "More than 306 grade magic crystals of fire element and 56 grade magic crystals of water element." "So little." "General, you don't know. The middle grade magic crystals in isolated Cliff City have almost been bought up. I guess the merchants in Black Raven City and Depew City are also buying magic crystals in large quantities. I've tried my best to collect so many magic crystals." "Humph." The deep voice snorted. "Fighting is fighting for money. Zagund of Black Raven City is brutal. Most of the civilians in his territory have been killed by him. You want to compete with us? You're dreaming." "Yes. How can Zagund be compared with our wise lord?" Leopold flattered Dismark and General Quincy in front of him. "Well, you'd better hurry up." The deep voice impatiently interrupted Leopold. "You don't need to rest at night. You must arrive at the Holy Crown City before noon the day after tomorrow." "Don't worry, General." Leopold laughed. The fleet kept moving forward, while the knight galloped in the opposite direction. Han Jin heaved a sigh of relief. His original intention was to launch a sudden attack after the knight separated from the fleet. But now he changed his mind. The fleet was so slow. How could they arrive at the Holy Crown City before noon the day after tomorrow? Why? Wouldn't they be attacked? Leopold promised with confidence. There must be something that others didn't know. Give me some recommendation votes, brothers. Chapter 65. Not knowing how long it had been, the carriages suddenly started to bump. Han Jin looked around through the wheels and found that the caravan had turned into a path. At the end of the path was a small hill. At the foot of the hill, there was a small village with only a few families, but none of them had a lamp. The whole place was lifeless. The caravan went straight through the village and went to the foot of the hill. More than a dozen guards jumped off and moved away the wheat straws piled high. With a faint rumbling sound, a 3-meter-high and 2-meter-wide cave appeared in front of them. There were more than a dozen knights in the cave. They should be familiar with the caravan, so they stepped aside and waved their hands to signal the caravan to hurry up. When the stone door of the secret cave was closed, the caravan had already entered a descending path. Due to the heavy load, at first the horses pulled the carriages, but later the carriages ran on top of the horses. Fortunately, there was a skillful coachman in each carriage who controlled the rhythm of the whole caravan. After about 1,000 meters, the caravan slowed down. There was a large square in front of them, and a campsite in the square. The cold north wind was blocked by the ground, so it was very warm here. Several soldiers in bright silver armor were sitting around the gate of the campsite, chatting about something. Now and then, there were women walking through the campsite. It seemed that this campsite had existed for a long time. Leopold chatted with the soldiers in front of the gate of the campsite for a while, and then commanded the caravan to move forward. Han Jin was still hiding under the carriage, carefully observing the surroundings. When he saw those soldiers sitting around the gate, his heart was in his throat. The angle was almost parallel to the ground. If those soldiers were a little more careful, it would not be difficult to find the abnormal shadow under the carriage. Unfortunately, this place had been lax for so long that vigilance had become unnecessary. There were traces of artificial excavation all around, which were not natural. So far, the amount of work he had seen had already stunned him. If this tunnel could lead to the Holy Crown City, it would be a miracle. It was really hard to imagine who could be so bold. The road ahead was very dark. About every 50 meters, there was a magic lamp installed, which could only let people see something faintly. It was definitely not bright. The guards in the convoy began to complain in a low voice. Han Jin listened for a moment and understood something. This tunnel would not be opened during non-war, nor would it be opened easily during war. Only when the situation was very difficult and blood transfusion was urgently needed, this tunnel would become the blood vessel for the survival of the Holy Crown City. The other end of the tunnel was in the Bite Man territory. In order to avoid unnecessary disputes, the troops of Black Raven City and Depew City would never break into the Bite Man territory, so the tunnel's safety was guaranteed. Of course, if Black Raven City and Depew City found such a tunnel, they would not be polite. The problem was, since they would not violate the Beatman's border, there was no need to talk about finding it. Every 1 kilometer, there would be several forks on the roadside. There were obvious marks at the forks, guiding the right direction. It was not a big deal to pass through one fork, but after passing through more than a dozen forks and seeing nearly 100 forks, Han Jin could not help but feel shocked. Wasn't this a huge underground maze? Dim places always made people sleepy, but the guards on the first carriage dared not slack. Others could make mistakes, but they could not. If they led the caravan into the forks, the consequences would be very serious, and they might never be able to get out. Leopold forced himself to wake up, got out of the carriage, and sat behind the coachman. He was a responsible man, at least to himself. The funny thing was that others only envied him and only saw his wealth, but could not see his hard work. When others were playing, he had to carefully calculate the gains and losses of each business deal. When others were resting, he had to keep his eyes open all the time, and he had to deal with all kinds of negotiations, flattery, and deceit. It could only be said that it was not easy to be in any profession. "Give me the flagon," Leopold yawned and said. The guard was sleeping soundly on the carriage and did not hear him at all. Leopold could not help but stare at him. This was a common problem of human beings. When he was enjoying, he did not want others to enjoy more than him. When he was suffering, he wanted everyone to suffer as much as he did. Leopold was seriously irritated when the guard was sleeping like a pig while he was trying his best to stay awake. His appearance didn't match his heart at all, or it could even be said that they were completely opposite. Leopold grabbed a whip casually and was about to lash it. Before the whip was moved, a fireball suddenly appeared and fulfilled Leopold's wish. However, the consequence was too serious. The guard flew out obliquely, hit the wall of the cave, and then rolled to the ground. His head had become a mass of coal. Leopold was in a daze. A figure fell down from above and sat beside him. Leopold looked sideways and couldn't help uttering a scream. The shrill scream spread far along the deep and serene tunnel. "What's the matter? Enemy attack? Enemy attack!" The whole team was in a mess. The coachman in front of Leopold found something wrong and hurriedly jumped off the carriage. But Leopold dared not move. He just stared at Han Jin blankly, like a frog seeing a snake. A guard stuck his head out from the corner, half of his body hiding behind the carriage. He slowly pulled a longbow and pointed the arrow at Han Jin more than 10 meters away. At the moment when the guard was about to loosen his fingers, a huge fist flew from the side and hit the guard's cheek. The guard only had time to scream before he flew out and hit the wall of the cave heavily. Then he bounced back. A wooden puppet jumped over the carriage and chased after him in the air. The second punch hit the guard's cheek, and then another. The whole cave trembled. When the wooden puppet locked on the next target, half of the guard's head had been deeply embedded in the wall of the cave. Only a bleeding mouth could be seen. The arc between his neck and his body was almost 90 degrees. Kill him. More than a dozen guards rushed at him from the front and back. Han Jin smiled and released another wooden golem. The two wooden golems blocked the attacks of the guards, one at the front and one at the back. Although the nature of the guards' work was similar to that of the mercenaries, their strength was at two ends. If they had enough strength, they could join a mercenary team and their personal income would suddenly increase by a dozen times or even more. So they didn't need to care about others' feelings. Han Jin was clear that the strongest guard captain was just a fifth-grade swordsman. He was confident enough to kill all the opponents. Leopold dared not move. His head and face were covered with cold sweat. A businessman's mind was really flexible. At this moment, he thought a lot of questions. Why did Mario come here after such a long time? Could it be that those knights had all been killed? The more he thought about this mercenary in front of him who had been following him in the cave, the more he thought about it, the more frightened he felt. A creepy feeling suffocated him. Chapter 66. Is it fun? Han Jin grinned. There's something more fun. Two talismans appeared in his hands, and then turned into light smoke. 10 ghosts appeared on the battlefield, and launched a counterattack with the wooden puppet which had been on the defensive. Oh my god, Ghost! That guy is a wizard. He's a wizard. Those guards were in a mess at that time. Although they didn't have the experience of fighting with wizards, it didn't prevent them from understanding the horror of wizards. The 10 ghosts hadn't fully exerted their fighting power, but the guards had begun to collapse, and Leopold directly passed out. For this group of low-grade professionals, the combination of the wood golem and the specter was extremely terrifying. As long as the specter got close to them, they would lose their vision and could only wield their weapons randomly. However, the wood golem was not affected at all. Every punch was very solid. Go away. The guard captain seized the opportunity when the wooden puppet was chasing his companions and chopped the wooden puppet's head with his sword, which made the wooden puppet fall back a few steps. Then he waved his long sword and rushed directly to Han Jin. It was a correct tactic to shoot the horse before shooting the horse, and to catch the bandits, capture the leader first. But it was a pity that his speed was not as fast as the ghosts. 2 ghosts came to him at the same time and surrounded him. However, he was still considered a man. He displayed an incomparably valiant aura. Although the 2 ghosts were crazily tearing and slapping his body, and although he couldn't see anything now, he still rushed in the direction of his impression. His long sword danced vigorously in the air. Han Jin reached out and pulled out the short sword on Leopold's waist. The short sword was very beautiful, and the workmanship was exquisite and precise. The hilt should be made of some magic beast's teeth or bones, and it felt very smooth with a row of small rubies inlaid on it. It was more of a handicraft than a weapon. Han Jin weighed it with his hand, and then he jumped up obliquely. His tiptoe touched the wall of the cave, and his body suddenly changed direction. His movements were agile, and he quietly fell behind the guard captain, and then he backhanded the short sword to him. With a thud, the short sword pierced into the guard captain's neck and came out from the other side. The guard captain's body suddenly became stiff, and his hands unconsciously struggled. Then the long sword fell to the ground, and his body became loose, hanging on the short sword shakily. The guard's resistance collapsed in an instant, and they desperately fled to the distance. Han Jin's eyes flickered, and then he became calm again. It was not because he wanted revenge, but to bring the greatest loss to the enemy. It was meaningless to kill those guards because the Holy Crown City could recruit dozens or even hundreds of guards. Only by robbing the goods could he bring great losses to the enemy. Under the command of Han Jin, the two wooden puppets became slaves and soon sorted out the messy carriages, while those ghosts became coachmen, driving the carriages to the fork road. After a while, the carriages entered a dark world. Fortunately, Ghost didn't need light. Han Jin didn't have any fixed target, so he just needed to move forward. He didn't want to control those ghosts. Leopold's breathing suddenly became heavy. Han Jin waited for a moment and found that Leopold was still motionless, pretending to be dead. He said with a smile, "You're awake." "Sir, you can't blame me." Leopold suddenly howled. "Those night forced me to do so, sir." His howl spread far and wide in the pitch-black cave and even produced echoes. Perhaps his howl was too shrill, and the horses began to snort uneasily. "Keep your voice down," Han Jin said lightly. "Sir, you can't blame me. I didn't want to do so, but they forced me to do so. Sir, I had no choice." Leopold sobbed. "I know Han Jin's smile was as warm as the spring breeze. "I won't kill you. If I wanted to kill you, you would have been dead just now." Leopold became silent, as if he was thinking about the credibility of Han Jin's words. "By the way, did you dig these tunnels?" Han Jin changed the topic. "No, I heard that these tunnels have been here for a long time. It seems that they were dug by crypt men." Leopold answered cautiously. "Crypt men? You don't know crypt men? Well, I've heard of them." Han Jin said in a low voice. "When did people in the Holy Crown City find these tunnels?" "I don't know, and they won't tell me. If I hadn't helped them to purchase military supplies, I wouldn't have been qualified to come here." Leopold hesitated for a while, and finally couldn't help asking, "Sir, where are we going?" "Whatever. I'll go wherever I go. Anywhere." Leopold found that Han Jin had always been kind, so he was a bit too bold. "Sir, we can't wander around here or we'll get lost." "Getting lost is better than being caught, don't you think?" Han Jin laughed. Of course, he wouldn't be afraid of getting lost. He could get out with an earth-meld charm, unless the vertical distance between here and the ground was more than 10 miles. "Sir, we can't go on like this. I have a suggestion to tell you. You won't blame me, will you?" Leopold said hesitantly. "Go ahead. Actually, it's all a misunderstanding." "Sir, I'm willing to vouch for you," Leopold said hurriedly. He was afraid that he wouldn't have the courage to continue if he was too slow. "I've dealt with the Holy Crown City for many times, and General Quincy is my good friend. As long as I speak, let me ask you a question." Han Jin interrupted Leopold's words. "If you were walking and saw a cliff in front of you, would you jump down?" "Of course not." "Neither would I," Han Jin said softly. "Well, you don't know that the guy named Mario has been killed by me." Han Jin laughed. Leopold was dumbfounded. He couldn't figure out. Since this mercenary dared to kill Mario, he wouldn't care about Leopold's identity. But why was he always so kind to him? He was just like an old friend. Every sound of the horse's hooves hit his heart, making him uneasy. Should he find a chance to escape? Just as this idea flashed through his mind, he denied it. God knew where he was. Could he find the way back? Chapter 67. On the plains, it was already snowing heavily, but somewhere underground, it was even more unbearable than the scorching summer. A river of lava surged through the canyon, the source of the heat and also the source of the light. Over 20 zhang above the canyon, there was a long iron chain bridge. The bridge was composed of iron plates and iron chains. Only the heavens knew how long this bridge had withstood the heat, so much so that the entire bridge had turned pitch black. It seemed abnormally heavy and aged. Leopold was lying on his stomach beside the canyon. His body was twisted in a weird posture, and his right hand was stretched backward with difficulty, trying to grasp the long sword nailed into the ground. The long sword not only pierced into the ground, but also penetrated his calf. Judging from the human body structure, if he kept his calf still, he couldn't exert his strength to grasp the hilt of the sword, unless he was determined to fight to the death and abandon his calf. "Damn it," Leopold cursed in a low voice. Then he lay down again dejectedly. With the dim light, it could be clearly seen that Leopold's wound had turned black, which was a very ominous color for any wound. Just then, the sound of hoofs came faintly from the underground cave, and then the sound of hoofs became more and more urgent. A moment later, a carriage galloped out of the underground cave, rushing straight to the iron chain bridge. However, there was a huge rock at the bridgehead blocking the way. The wooden puppet on the carriage pulled the reins hard, and the direction of the carriage changed abruptly. In the panicked and desperate neighing of the horses, the carriage leaped up and fell straight into the canyon. Then, one carriage after another rushed out of the underground cave, throwing themselves into the embrace of the lava river without hesitation. The extremely gorgeous and pure fiery red waves bloomed one after another, making the scene extraordinarily spectacular. When the last carriage rushed into the canyon, Han Jin jumped down from it lightly, watching the carriage fall, and then turned his eyes to Leopold, saying with a smile, "Did you miss me? You're crazy." Leopold knew the origin of those carriages, because Han Jin had talked to him in detail before he left. "Lord Dismark will never let you go. Let him come." Han Jin smiled, bypassed the boulder, and walked straight to the bridge. "If you want to take revenge on Mario and me, you've done enough." Leopold shouted like crazy. "Why don't you let me go?" "Because I'm a good person." Han Jin paused for a moment before lightly continuing. "When I am in trouble, if someone gives me a drop of water, I will use a clear spring to repay them. Of course, hatred is the same." Leopold fell silent and stared at Han Jin's back with frightened eyes. Han Jin walked to the center of the bridge, grabbed a hanging iron chain, and shook it hard. The iron chain flew up with a swoosh. Han Jin looked at the other end of the iron chain quietly. When the iron chain began to fall down, he caught it with his sharp eyes and quick hands. On the other end of the iron chain, there was a piece of horse meat that weighed about 5 to 6 kilograms. The lava river was a natural oven. It was not difficult to figure out where to roast the horse meat and how long to roast it for. After a few more experiments, one would be able to grasp it. Han Jin smelled the aroma of the horse meat and smiled with satisfaction. Just right. Leopold bit his lips tightly and suddenly lowered his head. Every time he did this, he would taste the unbearable and maddening pain. Han Jin walked to Leopold with the horse meat. "Do I need to change the place for you today?" No, I didn't do anything. Leopold's face had become livid. "That's good." Han Jin tore off a piece of horse meat and stuffed it into his mouth. He chewed it silently. Then he hesitated for a while and tore off a piece of horse meat about the size of a thumb. He bent over and handed it to Leopold. "Have some?" Leopold's eyes opened wide, as if they were going to roll out of his eye sockets. After a long time, a fire element magic crystal appeared in his hand. Leopold threw the magic crystal to the ground and stretched out his hand to grab the horse meat. Han Jin suddenly drew back his hand. 5 magic crystals. "What? You want to exchange such a small piece of horse meat for 5 magic crystals?" Leopold almost fainted. He roared, "Why don't you rob me? What do you think I'm doing?" Han Jin smiled. Leopold was speechless. After a while, he begged, "Let's just use the previous price, okay? Please, I don't have many magic crystals left." Han Jin smiled and put the piece of horse meat into his mouth. Then he took out a leather bag, raised his head, and drank a mouthful. He said softly, "Do you want some water?" Leopold's throat wriggled violently, but he clenched his teeth and didn't say anything. The fact was that all his magic crystals had been bought by Han Jin. He really couldn't afford to exchange 5 magic crystals for a small piece of horse meat. "Well, you give me all your magic crystals. I'll let you go after you eat as much as you want," Han Jin said softly. Leopold turned his head aside. He didn't believe it at all. "In fact, I can use other methods, but I didn't. I've been trying to avoid hurting you. Do you know why?" Leopold wanted to look up to the sky and laugh wildly. He also wanted to swear loudly. Nailing him here with a sword. How could it not hurt him? "Because I'm afraid of loneliness." Han Jin answered himself. "You see, you've been afraid that I'll kill you, so you've tried your best to please me. When you're free, you always chat with me or tell me stories about yourself and your family. This is what I want. Otherwise, how boring it would be for me to hide here alone. You've worked hard, which makes me very happy and moved." I'm telling the truth. If you do as I say, I'll let you go right away." Hearing these words, Leopold's eyes kept rolling, as if he was thinking about something. "You don't have much time." Han Jean smiled. "This time, they set a trap for me. Among those carriages, only 2 or 3 were loaded. If I'm not wrong, they should have caught up with me. Now you have to give me an answer. Do you agree or not? You really won't kill me?" Leopold looked at Han Jean. "There's no time." Han Jean sighed, then pulled out the long sword at his waist and raised it over his head. "I agree. I agree," Leopold screamed. He saw the killing intent in Han Jin's eyes, and he had thought it through. Even if he refused to hand over the rest of the magic crystals, it would not cause any harm to Han Jin, so he might as well take a gamble. "Oh!" Han Jin put down the long sword. With a crash, more than 100 magic crystals fell on the ground. Leopold said sadly, "These are all I have left." Han Jin put all the magic crystals into the space ring, then threw a large piece of horse meat and a leather bag for water in front of Leopold, and turned to walk to the bridge. "Hey, my lord, don't go. Let me go." Leopold cried with surprise and joy. "They're almost here," Han Jin said faintly. Then his body moved, and in a few leaps he had already crossed the iron chain bridge. Chapter 68. In the rapid sound of hoofs, dozens of knights rushed out of the tunnel with torches in their hands. Their horsemanship was excellent. The tunnel entrance was less than 20 meters away from the canyon. Ordinary people would be in a flurry, but those knights were at ease. They reined in their horses easily and then scattered in all directions. What a magnificent lava river! A knight let out a sigh from the bottom of his heart. There are traces of human activities here. Another knight found something. Just then, a hoarse and vague voice came. "General, it's me. Help me." The knights were shocked and looked in the direction of the voice. A thin, dirty arm stretched out from behind a stone and was shaking hard. Several knights urged their horses to move forward slowly and encircle the arm. The rest of the knights kept alert. When they approached the stone, a dirty man jumped into their sight. His clothes were ragged, even worse than that of a beggar. His face was covered with a thick layer of grease, which made it impossible to recognize his original appearance. Besides, there was a weird smell coming from his body. His entire body was on the ground, and a long sword had pierced through his calf and into the ground, nailing his leg there. The strangest thing was that he was actually chewing something in big mouthfuls, and his right hand was tightly hugging a piece of roasted meat of an unknown animal. "Who are you?" a knight asked loudly. "General Quincy. Are you here?" "I'm Leopold," Leopold said vaguely. He knew it was very impolite, but compared with the heart-wrenching hunger, impoliteness was nothing. "Who is it?" A tall figure stood in front of Leopold. "Leopold? You become like this?" Leopold had just swallowed the meat in his mouth and wanted to take another bite. Hearing Quincy's voice, he froze there and then slowly raised his head. The endless grievance turned into a sharp cry at this moment. "Is it really you?" "General, you have to avenge me. I thought those bandits must be... God bless." Quincy jumped down from his horse and shouted, "Tell me, who did it?" "It's a mercenary. That damn mercenary." Leopold gnashed his teeth and said, "Which mercenary?" Quincy was surprised. "He was the one who killed Lord Mario." "Mario, so it's him." Quincy's face suddenly turned gloomy. "Just one person?" "Yes, he's the only one here." Sir." The two knights who were on alert suddenly exclaimed one after another. "What are you shouting for?" Quincy said angrily. "Sir, we saw a shadow on the other side of the bridge." Leopold trembled all over as if he had taken a stimulant. "General, that's him. He just left not long ago." "General, we can't let him escape." Several impatient knights were about to pull their horses onto the bridge when Quincy suddenly shouted, "Wait!" All the knights were stunned and stared at Quincy. Quincy strode to the bridgehead, stretched out his foot, and heavily stomped on the bridgehead. The hundreds of feet-long iron chain began to sway like waves. Quincy observed for a moment patiently and felt there was no problem. He waved his hand, and the knight ran onto the bridgehead one by one and rushed to the other end. "General, don't leave me," Leopold shouted. He was a little flustered. "You and you," Quincy called out tonight randomly. "You two stay here and take care of him." "General," Leopold felt more and more scared. He didn't want Quincy to leave, but he couldn't find a suitable reason. Quincy nodded and stepped onto the iron chain bridge. Including Leopold's case, a total of 3 caravans disappeared in the underground cave. All of them were done by that mercenary, who was also the murderer of Mario. As the supreme commander of the base of the secret cave, he had to give an explanation. Otherwise, he and his family would spend the rest of their lives in the slave camp. Leopold looked at Quincy's back blankly. A knight suddenly whispered in his ear, "My lord, please bear with it." What? Leopold didn't understand. The next moment, he felt a sharp pain from his calf. The pain was so fierce that he was stunned for a moment before uttering an ear-piercing scream. "Ah, what the F***ck are you doing? My lord, just bear with it." The knight laughed, and then threw the long sword on the ground. Ding! The long sword hit the ground with a crisp sound, followed by another sound. Ding! The knight was stunned. How could there be 2 sounds? Just as he was wondering what was going on, the sound of a collision was heard again. This time, he could tell that something was wrong. He turned to look at the other end of the bridge and saw a figure using something to hit the iron chain. Clatter! An iron chain hung down softly, and the iron bridge began to deviate immediately. The figure on the opposite side went to the other side. The knight suddenly realized that someone was going to destroy the bridge. "Kill him! Quick!" The 2 knights turned pale with fright and rushed to the other side of the bridge as fast as they could. However, the bridge was too long. Just when they rushed halfway, the other iron chain left the bridge, and the bridge began to shake violently from side to side. The 2 knights were so scared that they lay prone on the bridge, clinging to the gap between the iron plates and daring not to move. Hanjin clapped his hands lightly and took out a fire charm from the space ring. He threw it out. The moment the fire charm left his hand, it turned into a weird fireball and flew across the sky at an extremely fast speed. With a boom, a huge rock more than 20 meters above the suspension bridge was hit. Numerous fine sand and stones fell down. From the point of view of Leopold and the others, the huge rock was very common. However, from the point of view of Hanjin, he could clearly see that the end of the huge rock that was deep in the cave wall had been hollowed out by someone. Hanjin threw out another fire charm. The huge rock couldn't bear the blow and fell down. The rock, weighing tens of thousands of kilograms, fiercely hit the iron bridge. The 2 knights on the bridge were petrified and watched the huge rock falling down. With a boom, more than a dozen iron chains fixed on the iron bridge broke at the same time. They were either thrown into the air or whipped on both sides of the valley, causing sand and stones to fly everywhere. Leopold lay on the ground, motionless. Just now, an iron chain was thrown over and split the beef into 2 pieces, which almost hit him. After quite a while, Leopold, who had just recovered from the shock, wanted to raise his head to take a look. Unexpectedly, a foot reached over and stepped on his hand heavily. Then he saw another hand, which naturally pulled the space ring off his finger. Chapter 69. Leopold felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. He plucked up his courage and raised his head. Sure enough, Hanjin was looking at him with a smile. Behind Hanjin, there were 5 floating ghosts. "What did you say just now?" Hanjin said in a low voice. "You want to take revenge on me? It seems that no one forced you this time, right?" "No, my lord." Leopold only felt bitter in his mouth. "People like you. When you are scared, you are as obedient as a dog. When you can turn over, you will immediately become a wolf." Hanjin smiled and suddenly kicked with the tip of his foot. Leopold involuntarily turned around twice, and his hand suddenly pressed nothing. Then he saw a surging lava river that was getting closer and closer to him. "Ah!" A shrill scream echoed in the canyon. At this time, the knight led by Quincy also sensed that something was wrong, and all of them hurried back. But the iron chain bridge had been destroyed. For the soldiers, the canyon which was hundreds of feet wide, was an insurmountable moat. They could only watch all this happen, without any power to help. The two sides stared at each other across the canyon. The knight's eyes were full of anger, and Han Jin's eyes were not merciful, either. This kind of hatred was somewhat absurd. For the knight, whether it was attacking the mercenaries sneakily before or chasing after Han Jin now, they were faithfully carrying out the orders of their superiors. In other words, they would never think that they were wrong. Those mercenaries, including Han Jin, deserved to die. On the other hand, from Han Jin's point of view, he had more reason to be angry. In order to make some gold coins and help Sylvia, they had walked for more than a month and finally delivered the goods to the border. However, they were attacked by the knight. Fortunately, Morrison's took a hostage. Otherwise, they might have been lying in the grave. This was intolerable. The two sides looked at each other for a moment. Han Jin sneered, turned around, and walked into the tunnel. He didn't need to have a head-on conflict with the knight. As long as he cut off their backup, it wouldn't take long for the knight to collapse. Judging from their clothes, they didn't prepare for a long battle. Moving around the lava river, they lacked food, but without water, those knights couldn't even live for more than 2 days. It was still dark in the tunnel, but Han Jin was already used to moving in the dark. He walked very fast and turned a corner in front of him. There was a faint light coming from the torches left by Quincy's knights, in case the reinforcements behind him or himself would take a wrong turn when they turned back. Han Jin pulled out the torch and stabbed it into the soil at the corner of the wall. The torch flickered for a few times and then went out. Han Jin destroyed the beacons left by the knights along the way. After some time, Han Jin walked past 6 forks. 6 torches appeared in his hand. This should be enough. Han Jin hesitated for a moment, then threw the torches in his hand to the ground. He threw 1 or 2 torches at each fork, then walked towards the last torch. After taking a few steps, Han Jin suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. It was as if someone was staring at him coldly in the dark. A person's gaze could create a certain kind of pressure. Han Jin had known this for a long time, so he never looked directly at his target when he was stalking. At this moment, a faint shadow appeared behind Han Jin. The shadow's right hand reached forward, and a dagger like a poisonous snake stabbed at the back of Han Jin's neck. Han Jin had already begun to be on guard, but he never expected that the shadow would appear behind him. Moreover, the shadow's movements were extremely fast. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was as fast as lightning. When he noticed that there was someone behind him, he felt a sharp pain on his back. The dagger had already pierced deeply into Han Jin's neck. Han Jin cried out in pain. His body swayed a few times, and he fell down. The shadow pulled out the dagger and silently watched Han Jin fall. Then, she walked up to Han Jin, wanting to flip his body over. However, just as she touched him, Han Jin's body exploded with a boom. The shadow was caught off guard. She only had time to close her eyes. Countless sand and stones flew in all directions and mercilessly hit her face and body. The shadow cried out in alarm and quickly retreated. A large fireball the size of a table flew over and brushed past the shadow's head. The fireball did not hurt anyone, but the consequences were more serious. The shadow's face became distorted, and she looked coldly at Han Jin. This person was her. She looked to be around 30 years old, but she took good care of herself. Her skin was even better. It was not pale from staying in a dark room for a long time, nor was it tanned from working hard. She was very healthy. No matter from which angle one looked at it, this woman was a beauty. It was a pity that most of her fluttering hair had been burned to ashes by the fireball. Those that were not burned were curled up, and some places were still smoking. It gave people a very strange feeling. The woman's body slowly faded and finally disappeared into the air. Han Jin was shocked, but he did not lack experience in fighting. At least he could distinguish what he should do immediately, what he should prepare to do, and what he should not do. Han Jin threw out a fire talisman. The fire talisman hit the last torch. With a bang, the torch was smashed into pieces. The light produced by the faint sparks was completely negligible, and the surroundings were once again plunged into complete darkness. Han Jin waited quietly. Can I just disappear? Then let's all disappear together. It was very quiet. Neither side dared to breathe loudly. Han Jin secretly changed to another place to hide. His right hand was tightly holding a long sword. The tip of the sword moved from time to time. It seemed that he was a little nervous. Fight or run? This was a headache. That woman's attack was too ruthless. He used a large amount of earth elements and nearly 7,000 yuan of energy to create the faked earth corpse technique. It was destroyed just like that. Han Jin was extremely distressed, so he was not willing to run away with his tail between his legs. He did not have much confidence to continue fighting. The knife just now still made him feel a lingering fear. Han Jin was wrong. That woman could see him all the time. Moreover, she was always moving towards his position. It was just that Han Jin's image was very blurry. The woman's movements were very patient. She was like a venomous snake quietly approaching its prey. It was a sharp contrast to the thunderous attack just now. Under Han Jin's control, the 5 ghosts were all lying on the ground. When the ghosts were floating in the air, they could maintain a certain shape. However, when they landed on the ground, they could not. The thing between substance and illusion could not be supported. In the end, they became a thin layer of things like pancakes. When the woman was less than 3 meters away from Han Jin, she happened to step on a ghost. She quietly moved forward. Han Jin could not sense her, but when she stepped on the ghost, Han Jin immediately caught her figure. However, he still remained motionless. Chapter 70. 2 meters. 1 meter. Half a meter. The woman stopped. Just as she raised the dagger, her face was suddenly scratched by something. Then, several guys with gloomy auras pounced on her. The woman turned pale with fright and recklessly stabbed out with the dagger. At the same time, Han Jin knelt on the ground with one knee. He grabbed the hilt of the sword with both hands and stabbed backward. The sharp blade brushed past his shoulder and pierced the woman's chest. Ah! The woman let out a sorrowful cry. Han Jin was right. The woman had maintained herself very well. The so-called good maintenance must have been because she had enjoyed a pampered life for a long time. Although her movements were still very fast, her reaction was far from before. People could rely on all kinds of hard work to improve and evolve. Correspondingly, there was also regression and degeneration. Even Han Jin didn't think that he could succeed so easily. He couldn't help but be stunned. The woman fell forward in a sorrowful cry and just happened to fall on Han Jin's back. Perhaps it was the final radiance of the setting sun, or perhaps it was because she remembered her son who had been killed. The woman didn't know where she got the strength. She grabbed Han Jin's hair and stabbed the dagger in her right hand towards Han Jin's face. Feeling the wind, Han Jin's left hand moved forward and tightly clasped the woman's wrist. Who knew that the woman's strength was surprisingly great? The tip of the dagger swayed a few centimeters in front of Han Jin's face. Han Jin couldn't push it away, and the woman couldn't stab it down. As for his hair, Han Jin really didn't care. He could even clearly feel that his hair was being pulled down strand by strand. However, even if he became bald, it was still better than having a few more holes on his body. Han Jin gritted his teeth and endured. His right hand shook the hilt of the sword up and down. His purpose was very obvious. It was to expand the woman's injuries. Meanwhile, the 5 ghosts continued to attack the enemy. Han Jin only felt that his body was getting wetter and wetter. Presumably, his entire back was dyed red. Also, with the crazy attacks of the ghosts, some kind of liquid kept splashing on his face. He didn't know what it was, but he heard the woman's voice become more and more painful and weak. Soon, the woman couldn't take it anymore. The dagger was gradually pushed away. Han Jin twisted his hand and threw the woman over his back. Then, Han Jin ran diagonally to a distance and stood with his back against the wall. Finally, he stretched out his hand, and a ball of soft white light rose from his palm. The tunnel slowly became brighter. He had been learning magic from cessation for a few days. Although he hadn't learned anything else, he was very proficient in inferior fireball and illumination. As long as there was fire element, he could release magic at any time. The five ghosts didn't care about the condition of the woman and continued to attack wildly. The woman was covered in blood from head to toe, as if she had just climbed out of a pool of blood. Han Jin looked at himself and couldn't help but smile bitterly. He wasn't much stronger than a human. At this moment, Han Jin faintly heard some voices. Under his control, the five ghosts stopped their attacks and floated in the air. Madam, wait for us." Han Jin hid in the corner and waited quietly. Not long after, a few people appeared in the tunnel. At the front was a magician holding a ball of light. He floated in the air, and the ball of light was very bright, illuminating the tunnel as if it was daytime. Behind him were a few warriors in heavy armor. Their armor looked very luxurious. It was bright yellow in color, and there were many mysterious patterns engraved on it. After turning into the tunnel, the magician and the warriors saw the corpses on the ground and the ghosts floating in the air. At this moment, they were all dumbfounded. Han Jin had been waiting for a long time. He raised his hand and cast a fire talisman. A fireball the size of a round shield appeared out of thin air. With an ear-piercing screech, it pierced through the air at lightning speed and hit the magician at the front. With a loud bang, the magician flew out and hit the soldier behind him. Han Jin would never let go of a drowning dog. He had already jumped out and was about to throw out the wooden commander's seal. But the next moment, he was stunned. The magician who had been hit was unscathed and even sneered at him. Han Jin reacted quickly. He put the wooden commander's seal back into his space ring and ran straight into the wall of the tunnel. A huge bolt of lightning followed and hit the place where Han Jin disappeared. A violent boom echoed along the tunnel, but Han Jin couldn't hear it. Asterisk, 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 countless tiny snowflakes fell from the sky like a white sandstorm. Moxing shrank his neck. If it were snowflakes, the weather would not be that cold. He hated this kind of snowflakes the most, which made him feel cold and painful when they hit his face. Besides, if he released his strength of fighting because of this little bit of snowflakes, he might be ridiculed by others. In the end, he had no choice but to endure it. After they escaped that day, they ran for dozens of miles in one breath. After a short rest, Sunir urged the horses to continue forward. They climbed over a mountain diagonally and settled down in a small village. The next day, Sunir came back to meet with everyone. They debated for a long time about what to do next. In the end, they decided to stay here and wait for Han Jin. In fact, they also knew that the probability of Han Jin surviving was very small. However, Morrisons and Stillberg were very determined. Their central idea could be summed up in 2 sentences. If he was alive, they wanted to see him. If he was dead, they wanted to see his corpse. The problem was that even if Han Jin was alive, he couldn't know where they were hiding. Therefore, Morrisons and Sunir could only take turns to wait by the roadside. This was the stupidest way. After a few days, they finally received a message. It was said that many knights of the Holy Crown City had appeared in the territory of the Bite Man. They were searching for something day and night and had small conflicts with the army of the Bite Man. Everyone was very excited. The army of the Holy Crown City had broken into the territory of the Bite Man at the risk of a diplomatic conflict. This meant that Han Jin had probably escaped from the tiger's mouth. Morrisons ran out that night and wrote a line of big words on a big tree by the roadside. His original words were, "Have you eaten today?" Later, he felt that this sentence was too vague, so he added some words and changed it to, "Can you eat an entire earth bear?" Morrisons explained that Han Jin would definitely understand this sentence, so he wouldn't miss it. However, as time went by, everyone was disappointed day by day. If Han Jin was really safe, he should have come and meet with them. However, even though they were disappointed, Morrisons and Sunir still insisted on waiting for him every day. At least, they would wait until the next spring. They needed to give an explanation, not only to their partners, but also to themselves. She was just better at controlling her emotions. Morrisons finally let go of Han Jin after 17 or 18 rounds. Han Jin glanced at Morrisons and then looked at Sunir with a smile. "Come, give me a hug," Compared to Morrison's excitement, he was more interested in Sunir's enthusiasm. It was said that elves were extremely beautiful. Han Jin had always been curious about this. Sunir looked at Han Jin quietly. Her eyes were full of smiles. It wasn't a warm smile, but it was very warm. Han Jin walked closer and closer, but Sunir didn't move. Finally, the two of them stood face to face. Han Jin laughed dryly. He was just too happy and wanted to make a joke. No matter how Sunir reacted to his arms, be it shyness, purposely avoiding him, or even coming up to him, or even being angry, he wanted to at least show some attitude so that he could decide whether to continue the joke or not. However, Sunir didn't move at all. This made him feel a little awkward. He couldn't just ignore her and hug her, right? Han Jin helplessly put his arms down. Just as he was about to find something to say, Sunir suddenly came up to Han Jin and hugged him gently. She patted Han Jin on the back a few times and said in a low voice, "Welcome back." Han Jin was stunned. Just as he was thinking about whether he should hug her back, Sunir had already taken a few steps back. If he hugged her now, it would be pure molestation. Han Jin could only blame himself for his clumsy reaction speed. The three of them walked up the mountain side by side. The snow and the howling wind didn't affect their mood. On the contrary, it gave them a sense of heroism. The three of them stood straight and laughed loudly in the wind. Among them, Morrison's was the most unrestrained. He simply took off his leather armor and let the wind and snow hit his chest. He felt that it was too hot inside. If he didn't do that, it wouldn't be enough to express the excitement in his heart. After crossing the mountain, the small village where Morrison's and the others lived in seclusion was at the bottom. Looking from above, there were about a dozen families. Not only did beasts hibernate, but humans also did the same. Those families closed their doors and let the wind and snow fill up their courtyards and block their doors. In this kind of weather, they would never go out. After all, they had already prepared food and necessities. When they were a few dozen meters away from the village, Morrison suddenly shouted at the top of his lungs, "Stillberg, get out here! Look who's back! Damn it, if you dare to scold me again, I'll skin you alive." Han Jin couldn't help but laugh. From the sound of the gongs and drums, it seemed that Stillberg and Morrison's had a lot of conflicts. It was probably because of Han Jin's disappearance. After a while, Stillberg's figure appeared at the door of the courtyard. When he saw Han Jin, he was stunned. Then his scream spread throughout the village. "Master! Master!" Seeing Stillberg stumbling over, Han Jin was very touched. Compared to Morrison's and the others, Stillberg's feelings for him were the purest. Even if he was a useless piece of trash, Stillberg would still treat Han Jin as his master. "It's really you." Sasu appeared at the door of the courtyard. Michelle, Sylvia, and Chili also came out. Almost everyone was here. Han Jin patted Stillberg's shoulder and pulled Stillberg forward. Sunir purposely stayed a few steps behind and even tugged at Morrison's sleeve. She then lowered her voice and said, "Did you notice that he's different from before?" "What's different?" Morrison's was stunned. "There's a murderous aura around him. Can't you feel it?" "I have a murderous aura too." Morrison's looked around with a majestic look. Sunir hit her forehead with her hand and said helplessly, "You forget it. You won't understand. If you've been in the army and survived several wars, you'll know what I'm talking about." Chapter 72. They sat around the red fireplace. The blazing flame drove away the darkness and the coldness. The room was not big. It was built by an ordinary farmer in a remote valley. The material and structure of the house were imaginable. Even this fireplace was built by Morrisons after they bought these houses because they didn't know how long they would wait. Han Jin was silent, as if he was thinking about something. Everyone's eyes were focused on Han Jin. Sunir asked a question just now. Now that Han Jin was back, where should they go? Should they stay here or go somewhere else? "To be honest, we are not lucky," Han Jin said with a smile. "We are always in trouble. I even have a feeling of being forced to flee everywhere." Hearing Han Jin's words, all of them showed a wry smile. It was true. From Radon Town to isolated Cliff City, they had hardly had a peaceful day. They were always running from one place to another in panic. Have you noticed that there's a kind of power in this world that could deprive others of their right to live and plunder others' property? Han Jin said slowly. You're talking about power. Sunir sighed. In fact, every place is equally dark. You always say that isolated Cliff City is safe, but what's the result? I don't ask you to be aware of anything, but at least you can't be naive anymore. Han Jin said slowly. No matter where we go, will the result make any difference? Raphael, what are you trying to say? Sasu asked in a low voice. Since others can speak with their swords, and this has become the rule of the world, so can we. Han Jin paused. I think no one wants to struggle for survival in the cracks, right? Why don't you change your way of thinking? Why do I feel that you want to fight against the other lords? Sunir smiled bitterly. Not everyone had the right to speak with their swords. Only the lords with great power had the right to do so. No matter where they went, they had to obey and follow the rules there. Han Jin wanted to have the right to speak for himself. That was already very clear. If you're really confident, why not? Han Jin asked back. Everyone was stunned. Han Jin's tone was too arrogant. How could they fight against the lords with only a few people? Raphael, you don't know what a lord means. Sunir said slowly, take Dismark, the lord of Holy Crown City, as an example. Because we used to be allies, I know the strength of Holy Crown City. Dismark himself is a supreme knight, with more than 100 generals and about 200 mages. You mean you want to lead us to fight against such people? This is not a matter of confidence, but of madness. It seems that our definition of confidence is somewhat different. Han Jin said lightly. In my opinion, confidence is not believing that you are strong, but believing that you will become stronger. Become stronger? Become as strong as Dismark? Sunir laughed. These days, I have thought a lot. Everywhere is full of chaos, and even survival has become a problem. Han Jin said softly, Ho ho, being the weak is not a good life. Being the strong is not a good death. The so-called fate, in fact, is to make a choice between living a bad life and dying a bad death. Han Jin's words were somewhat pessimistic, or in other words, tragic, but he successfully changed the topic of whether to take up arms to fight against the lords, making a choice between living a bad life and dying a bad death. Some of them studied magic, and some practiced fighting power because they didn't want to be the weak. Did they really want to live a bad life? In comparison, why not be more straightforward and become a powerhouse who would die a horrible death? At least, they would have a glorious and proud life. As a matter of fact, Han Jin's statement was somewhat inappropriate because he had placed dying a horrible death in an inevitable position. However, he had cleverly laid out the living a horrible life in the beginning. During this period of time, everyone had a deep understanding of the meaning of this sentence. Comparing the two sentences before and after, they couldn't help but feel sorrowful, which was extremely bewitching. If you are afraid of death, then don't be a mercenary. Morrison's used his own actions to show the bravery of a mercenary. He said slowly, as long as you are here, I am confident in our future. Sasua's eyes lit up. Yes, Han Jin had mastered a unique magic. With time, and his own hard work and sweat, becoming a top-tier master was not a dream. What could they rely on to live a happy and fulfilling life in this world? In the end, it was strength. With all kinds of strength, if they had a few top-tier masters to protect them, what couldn't they do? Sunir suddenly burst out laughing. She was laughing so hard that she was almost out of breath. The three of them were not acting without reason. To be exact, it was the result of their different experiences. In comparison, Morrison's experience was the worst among them. He was also reckless and impulsive, so he was the first to stand out and support Han Jin. Sasu was much calmer, but Han Jin's magic was irresistible to him. Naturally, he found a reason to support himself. Sunir was the only exception. She had once participated in the epic guerrilla war. It could be said that she had climbed back from a pile of dead people. A person like her would not be easily persuaded by anyone. In fact, Han Jin did not want to persuade Sunir. As long as Sunir did not strongly oppose it, it was fine. He could let Sunir see hope through action. What are you laughing at? Morrison's asked unpleasantly. We are crowded in a shabby house with no ventilation on all sides. In the morning, we just ate a few pieces of dry bread and some cheese with a strange smell. There are less than 10 of us in total, but we are discussing how to fight against the lords. Haha, don't you think it's funny? Is it funny? It's funny to live alone without any dreams. Han Jin replied lightly. It seems that you are serious? Sunir stopped laughing. Not only am I serious, but I've also done a lot of things. Han Jin paused. Do you know why the knight was waiting for us at that place when we escorted the military supplies? We haven't entered the territory of the Holy Crown City yet. Chapter 73. What? Sunir asked. Because there's a secret passage leading to the Holy Crown City. What? Sunir was shocked. She had participated in the war, so she knew what this news meant. I've already spread the news. At least, the army of the Black Raven City has already known about it. They sent their army to attack the secret passage, but the army of the Holy Crown City has been resisting. When I left, they were fighting fiercely, huh? Han Jin smiled. The battle between the Holy Crown City and the Black Raven City has also alarmed the army of the Bite Man. They sent several messengers to urge the army of the Holy Crown City and the Black Raven City to withdraw from the territory of the Bite Man. Unfortunately, no one is willing to listen to them. No wonder. Morrison's patted his thigh. Today's weather is so bad. In the early morning, several knights rushed to the north like crazy. I guess they went back to deliver the news. The strength of the Bite Man has been divided into 4 parts. If they can't unite, it's hard for them to pose a threat to the Holy Crown City and the Black Raven City. How can the Holy Crown City and the Black Raven City pay attention to the request of a small castellan? Sunir sighed. I know you hate the Holy Crown City, so you try to make trouble for them. But Dismark knows better than us how important this secret passage is. And Dismark has arranged it for many years. The Black Raven City can't take advantage of it. Have you forgotten what kind of soldiers the army of the Black Raven City is? Han Jin smiled. And it's not a secret passage, but a huge underground maze. An underground maze? How big is it? It goes all the way to the bottom of the Holy Crown City. How big do you think it is? Han Jin sneered. I think the good days of the Holy Crown City have come to an end. You've really tricked Dismark. Sunir sighed. If it weren't for the underground maze, today's heavy snow would have forced them to make peace temporarily. But now, no one will stop fighting until one party completely occupies the underground maze. The more they fight, the better it is for us. Han Jin said slowly. Furthermore, the battle this time has already reached deep into the Beatman's territory. Will they do nothing but watch from the sidelines? I won't. Sunir shook her head and said, the armies of the 2 cities have already invaded our territory. We can't show any signs of weakness at this time. Otherwise, no matter which side emerges as the final victor, they will immediately shift their target to the Bite Man. I'm guessing that the Bite Man will have a very strong reaction. Now that they've joined forces, naturally, no one will care about us, right? Han Jin smiled. In fact, I also know that our strength is too weak. If we work hard step by step according to the normal method, we will be crushed to death at any time, anywhere, as long as someone notices us and those lords stretch out a finger. It's good that you know, Sunir said. Therefore, our only chance is to make this land more chaotic and crazy. Make them hate each other even more, and even fight each other at all costs. Han Jin said word by word. After coming out of the underground maze, I snuck into the barracks of Black Raven City. Are you crazy? Sunir exclaimed. I used a kind of magic. Don't worry, they couldn't find me. Han Jin smiled and said, at that time, I saw that the morale of the soldiers of Black Raven City was very low. It was said that at the beginning of the war, Dismark didn't get any support from Wild Willow City, so he decided to abandon the small towns and use the fortified cities to fight a protracted war with the enemy. Many of the soldiers of Black Raven City and Depew City had already been exhausted. Also, Lord Zagund and Lord Ma Li had quarreled several times. You heard all this from the soldiers? Sunir asked. Yes. They don't know how to keep this kind of thing a secret. It seems that Zagund and Ma Li Sin are not interested in continuing the war. Sunir said in a low voice, but their goal should have been achieved. Ma Li Sin loves money as much as his life. He attacked the Holy Crown City to rob money, which is also Dismark's strength. Everyone has the same starting point. Zagund and Ma Li Sin are getting poorer and poorer, but Dismark can make the Holy Crown City richer and richer, which is not easy. As for Zagund, he not only wants money, but also a large number of people. Zagund is cruel and bad-tempered. If he is slightly annoyed, he will use all kinds of reasons to slaughter civilians and slaves. Moreover, he indulges his subordinates and never restrains the soldiers. How to say? It is not too much to describe Zagund's territory as hell. Yes, Sasu continued, this guy has the worst reputation, and he is also the most shameless dark druid. He kills his own people, then goes to other people's territories to rob them. After robbing them, he kills them again, and then robbing them again. If there's really a god watching this world, a guy like Zagund should have died thousands of times. Unfortunately, Sasu stopped here and shook his head with a bitter smile. If I had a choice, Sunir paused, I really hope that we are helping the Holy Crown City to fight against the Black Raven City, instead of helping those butchers of the Black Raven City. The question is, do we have a choice? Han Jin smiled. Moreover, the Black Raven City didn't raise their butcher's knife against us, but your former allies, the soldiers of the Holy Crown City, are determined to kill us. It's meaningless to argue about this. Sunir glanced at Morrison's and said, it seems that. I don't need to ask. I have seen the answer from your eyes. We are partners, aren't we? Sasu smiled. Yes, we are. Sunir stood up with a smile and walked towards the door. Sunir? Sasu cried out in surprise. Yes. Sunir looked back at Sasu and finally fixed her eyes on Han Jin. Don't worry, I won't leave. Although this dream is too far away, but I have made a promise. What did you promise? Morrison's asked in surprise. It's a secret. Sunir smiled and pushed the door open. Good heavens, you two have secrets? Morrison squinted at Han Jin. Tell me, how many things are you hiding from us? Morrison's had learned to beat around the bush. His focus was not on the secrets, but on the magic that Han Jin had hidden. If it were him, he would never be able to escape from the encirclement of hundreds of night. Therefore, he firmly believed that Han Jin still had many tricks up his sleeve. Chapter 74. During this period of ice and snow, life was relatively peaceful. However, no one dared to slack off. Morrison's, Sasu, and even Sunir began to train as hard as they could. Han Jin's presence had undoubtedly provided them with an incomparable guarantee. One day was equivalent to a few days in normal times. What could be more exciting than this? Moreover, a charm of spirit refreshment only consumed a few dozen yuan of energy, and Han Jin's energy base was getting stronger and stronger. He did not care about this little bit of energy. The mountain village was very peaceful because the other farmers basically did not go out of their houses. It was also very noisy because Morrison's was used to releasing his combat power with his roar. There were only a dozen families here, and his roar could easily cover the entire village. Sylvia was a very strange person. God knew how Morrison's explained to her. Anyway, her actions were very difficult to understand. She often gathered her brothers, the members of the Burning Rose mercenary group that she had established. In fact, she didn't have many people to begin with. After the escape last time, a few people left the mercenary group. Now, there were only 3 people left. What could 3 people do? However, Sylvia insisted on training them to form a battle formation. Sometimes they would raise their spears, and sometimes they would raise their shields. Instead of saying that this was training, it was more appropriate to say that she was messing around. The most hilarious thing was that she actually asked others to address her as general. If her request was met, she would be all smiles and take the initiative to get close to you. She would even throw you a few flirtatious glances and repay you with sex appeal. If her request was not met, she would be very, very angry. No matter what you said, she would ignore you. Of course, Sylvia was also a wise person. As the saying went, it was better to share happiness with others than to share happiness with others. In order to prevent others from deliberately going against her, she simply took the initiative to give out the sweet juices. For example, General Morrison's General Sassu, and even Stillbird became a general. Happy or bitter, time was always passing by. Several months later, it was the season of melting snow again. Nothing had changed in the village, but in another place, the army of the Black Raven City won the battle and occupied the main tunnel, driving all the troops of the Holy Crown City to the ground. Nothing had changed in the village, but in another place, the meat grinder, which had been running for several months, had killed countless creatures. Finally, the army of the Black Raven City won the battle and occupied the main tunnel, driving all the troops of the Holy Crown City to the ground. However, the situation in Black Raven City was not optimistic. The tunnel was connected to the Holy Crown City. From Dismart's point of view, a large number of enemies could appear at any time. It was like sitting on the crater of a volcano. No one could stay calm. Therefore, sooner or later, Dismark would launch an all-out counterattack. The diplomatic tone of the Bite Man became more and more strict. He strongly demanded that the army of Black Raven City should withdraw and let the army of the Bite Man take over the underground city. This was, of course, a joke, but a joke that must be taken seriously. In contrast, Han Jin and his companions had a much easier time. On this day, the warm sunshine was shining on the forest which had been covered by the snow. Sunir, Cessation, and the others were standing in a circle, encircling Han Jin and Moxink in the middle. "Are you ready?" Han Jin asked in a low voice. "Are you still a man? If you are, you should allow me to use a sword." Morrison's University yelled. "That day will come." Han Jin smiled. "It's about to start, damn it." Morrison's looked a little flustered. "Sunir, be smart this time. Release your magic as soon as you see something wrong. Don't be like last time. How many times have you been nagging?" Sunir didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I'm nagging?" Morrison's was really angry now. He pointed at his face and yelled. There was an obvious bruise on his face. He must have been hit by someone. At this moment, Han Jin's aura suddenly changed. He was gentle and elegant before, but now he was extremely arrogant and fierce. His pupils shrunk to the size of 2 needles. He clenched his fists so hard that the veins on his fists bulged. At this moment, Han Jin looked as if something in his body had exploded. "Not again," Morrison's exclaimed and hurriedly released his combat aura. Michel, Stillberg, and the others immediately scattered. General Sylvia also ran far away, because Han Jin had created a new berserk spell. When he entered the berserk state, everyone knew who Han Jin was. It could be said that they had already suffered before. Even Sunir and Sassu retreated more than 10 meters away. Sassu even cast a magic shield for himself. Han Jin in the berserk state was too violent and aggressive. It made people feel uneasy from the depths of their souls. Morrison's grabbed a wooden shield and blocked in front of him. Han Jin clenched his fists tighter and tighter. His cold and sharp eyes were locked onto Morrison's. In fact, that was not the berserk state at all. It was the spirit possession spell of the 36 mystical arts. The legends had already made the spirit possession spell of the 36 mystical arts. It was said that the spirit possession spell of the 36 mystical arts could make the user invulnerable. It was said that the spirit possession spell of the 36 mystical arts could make the user invulnerable. It was said that the spirit possession spell of the 36 mystical arts could make the user invulnerable. This was only a basic mystical art. Han Jin had seen the spirit possession spell of the 36 mystical arts before, but he had never learned it properly, so he only knew half of it. His original intention was to master one more battle technique. However, for some reason, the spirit possession spell of the 36 mystical arts deviated a little. After his body became more agile and tenacious, and his strength increased by a lot, he lost his mind. The side effects were exactly the same as the berserk state that Sasu had mentioned. Morrison's took a step back uneasily. At this moment, Hanjin opened his mouth and said, "Be careful." Then he suddenly sprinted forward. His body was already extremely fast. When he said, "Be careful," he had just started moving. When he said, "Be careful," Hanjin had already rushed in front of Morrison's and kicked the wooden shield heavily. With a loud bang, the tall and strong Moxink, who had released his strength of fighting in advance, was forced to take several steps back before he could stabilize himself. Hanjin, on the other hand, did a somersault. As soon as his toes touched the ground, he shot out again like a sharp arrow, punching crazily on the wooden shield with his iron fists. "Quick, he's out of control again," Sasu yelled. Sunir swung her hand and threw out the talisman that Hanjin had given her. A white light flashed, and Hanjin's body froze. "I'm not playing anymore." Morrison's threw the wooden shield far away. "What's going on? Didn't you say that it would work this time?" Hanjin looked at his red fists and smiled bitterly. "When I kicked the wooden shield, I still felt something. Then I suddenly lost consciousness." Chapter 75. Do you still want to practice? Sunir asked. "Let's call it a day. I must have made a mistake somewhere." Hanjin frowned and said, "Before I figure it out, practicing won't work. Actually, I can still hold on for a while." Seeing that Hanjin didn't want to practice anymore, Morrison's finally felt relieved. However, he added another sentence to show how strong and tough his body was. "Oh." Then, Hanjin's expression changed a bit. "I think we should go back to eat first." Morrison's hurriedly shouted. He wanted to slap himself in the face. "Everyone is hungry, right?" "I'm not hungry." Sasu smirked and said, "Let's get down to business. Raphael, can you figure out what's wrong?" "Damn it, I know you're the worst," Morrison's said angrily. "Don't quarrel. What's that over there?" Sunir suddenly cut in. The others followed Sunir's gaze and saw a black line meandering towards them from afar. They could faintly see dozens of flags fluttering in the wind. Obviously, it was not a caravan, but a large regular army. Judging from the direction, they probably came from the north city of the Bite Man. An army? Morrison's frowned. An army that smelled the fishy smell. Hanjin smiled. "Fishy smell? What do you mean?" Sunir asked in astonishment. In the past, the Bite Man always made verbal protests, but never took action. Why? Because they didn't want to join the scuffle. Hanjin paused and continued, "Now, I guess the battle between the Black Raven City and the Holy Crown City has already ended. So the Bite Man finally couldn't help but take action." Sunir took a deep look at Hanjin. Regardless of whether Hanjin's analysis was right or wrong, the fact that he could make such a guess was enough to prove something. "Then do you think the Beatman's army will be able to gain an advantage? I don't understand these things, but I know that a sword will rust if it is not sharpened." Hanjin smiled. "How long has it been since the Bite Man participated in a war? That's not the most important thing, is it?" Sunir said slowly. "If even this is not important, then there is nothing important." Hanjin smiled and said, "Zagund of Black Raven City is so detestable. Many people want to kill him, don't they? However, Zagund had been living well all this while. He had survived the hatred, hostility, fear, and loathing of others until today. This was a very rare ability. Furthermore, he continued to kill and plunder. Why? I don't think anyone can deny that Zagund has an extremely elite army under his command. The army of Black Raven City is really terrifying." Sunir's face was a little pale. Obviously, she was reminded of the days when she was fighting everywhere. "By the way, Sunir, I remember the first time I met you. You were surrounded by a flock of black ravens." Hanjin paused. You didn't break into their army, did you?" "I went to find a friend." Sunir sighed. "A friend?" Hanjin was stunned. Didn't Zagund's army consist of a group of vicious people? How could Sunir have friends there? It's not something that can be explained in a few words. "I'll tell you later," Sunir said softly. "Okay." Seeing that Sunir didn't want to talk about it, Hanjin didn't ask further. At dusk, A troop transporting military supplies set up camp near the small village. However, they didn't harass the villagers. Instead, they set up camp in the field on the other side of the road. Sunier and Morrison's hid on the hill and observed for a long time. After confirming that the troop didn't intend to harass the farm, they retreated to the village one after another. They couldn't be blamed for being suspicious. In the eyes of the farmer, they were very, very rich people. For example, when they bought wheat and mountain products from the farmer, Sunier and the others were very generous. One reason was that they didn't want to compete with the poor farmer, and the other reason was that most of the goods they carried were gold coins. They could only use gold coins to buy wheat and mountain products. If the soldiers knew that a group of rich people lived in the village and had bad intentions, they would be in big trouble. Perhaps their skills hadn't improved much after fleeing from one city to another, but they had firmly remembered what it meant to be sinister. Han Jin paced back and forth in the room. He couldn't understand why the spirit possession skill could make people lose their minds. This shouldn't be. The talisman couldn't be wrong, and the mental cultivation method couldn't be wrong either. He had already flipped through the 3 Taoist scriptures that his master had collected. He had also used the spirit possession skill before. Other than feeling a little tired, there weren't any other adverse effects. Could it be that the 2 worlds were different? The reason why Han Jin spent so much effort to study the spirit possession skill was because the spirit possession skill would have an extremely important impact on the overall strength of the team. Although the spirit possession skill was a very simple Taoist magic, it was on a completely different level compared to the berserk magic that Sasu advocated. The berserk magic could only increase a person's strength and numb their nerves. It could also cause a person's emotions to sink into a state of irritation, making it extremely offensive. On the other hand, the spirit possession skill didn't only increase a person's strength, it also increased their eyesight and speed. After a qualified caster used the spirit possession skill, they would be able to produce a defensive power similar to the Golden Bell Shield and Iron Shirt. The rumor of being invulnerable to swords and spears wasn't just nonsense. The most important thing was that the amount of energy required to make a talisman of the spirit possession skill was about the same as the spirit refreshment spell. The cost was very small, but the benefits were huge. If Sunier and the others could use the spirit possession skill, what kind of concept would that be? Sasu would charge into the group of enemies in an unyielding manner. His magic staff would dance up and down, circling left and right, and the enemies would die if they came into contact with it. Sunier's strength would also increase exponentially. If she was given a big enough bow, she could even shoot a thick log as an arrow. As for Morrison's, needless to say, Han Jin dared to guarantee that Morrison's would definitely like that feeling. However, all of this had to be done before he could solve the problem of losing his mind. Han Jin thought nervously as he walked, completely forgetting about the time of day. After an unknown amount of time, he suddenly heard a soft sound coming from outside. At this moment, he happened to be standing by the door, so he pushed it open. The first thing Han Jin saw was a pair of beast-like eyes, filled with despair and hatred. Then a cold light went straight for his throat. Chapter 76. A few months ago, after he had almost been killed by that woman in the tunnel, Han Jin had specially strengthened his physical training. Although the woman's appearance was very abrupt, Han Jin still reacted in time and took a small step back when the cold light suddenly pierced him. Seeing that his dagger had missed, the opponent was stunned for a moment, and an anxious expression appeared on his face. He then rushed towards Han Jin and shouted, "Don't move." Even a woman would shout at this time, and Han Jin was never one to wait for death. He took another step back and swung his right hand forward. A dazzling ball of fire shot out. Seeing this, the opponent was shocked and dodged sideways. The ball of fire brushed past his shoulder and hit the wall. With a boom, a large hole was blasted in the wall. "Damn it, what's going on?" Morrison's cursed in the distance. "You're a magician?" The assassin cried out in shock. Then he gritted his teeth, and his body gradually faded until he finally disappeared into thin air. Han Jin sneered. He waved his hand, and a wooden puppet suddenly appeared where the assassin had disappeared. It swung its thick arms and hit everywhere. The assassin was hit somewhere, and his body staggered as he appeared. Finally, he knelt on the ground with a thud. Han Jin finally saw that there were 2 black arrows stuck in the assassin's back. They were deeply embedded in his flesh, and the blood around the wounds was bright red. The assassin had not been injured for long, at most half an hour. "You?" The assassin struggled to raise his head. He wanted to say something, but the wooden puppet had already taken a step forward and punched the assassin with its fists. Although he knew that the situation was not good, he no longer had the ability to dodge. Blockhead's fist heavily smashed into his back, and the wound was instantly torn open. Blood splattered everywhere, and the assassin let out a muffled groan before falling limp to the ground. "What's wrong?" Morrison's rushed in with his sword raised. He also saw the assassin on the ground and cried out in shock, "Who is this guy?" Han Jin was just about to speak when Sasua's voice came from outside. "Not good. Not good. Quick!" Han Jin was stunned for a moment. He couldn't care less about the unknown guy. He hurriedly rushed out of the room and almost collided with Sasu. "Quick!" Sasu panted and said, "Everyone, pack up. We're leaving this place immediately. Those soldiers are suddenly rushing towards us." Sunir walked out of the main room. She listened carefully and shook her head. "It's too late. They have a knight. Weren't they fine earlier?" Morrison's asked in shock. "Why are they suddenly coming after us?" Han Jin turned his gaze back and quietly looked at the unconscious man. After a while, he said, "Maybe it's because of him. Come, let's throw him outside." Not long after, a group of knights rushed in from outside the village. The village was so small that they could clearly see the figure lying on the ground from outside. There was no need for them to search from house to house. A knight jumped off his horse and strode over. He reached out and grabbed the man's hair. After carefully examining him, he turned around and shouted, "Sir, we've caught him. Young master! Young master!" Suddenly, there was a cry from the knight group. Looking in the direction of the cry, Han Jin and the others saw an old man in his 50s who was struggling to get up. The knight beside him couldn't hold him back, and the old man fell off his horse. The knight cursed and picked up his spear. Just as the old man struggled to get up, a knight's spear swept from behind like a poisonous snake and hit the old man's thigh heavily. Looking at the old man who was wailing in pain, the knight group burst into laughter. Humility, honor, sacrifice, valor, compassion, faith, honesty, and justice were the principles of the knight group. Unfortunately, the world had been in chaos for too long. The knight group had evolved from the guardians of justice to the tools of governance. Perhaps there were still people who remembered the principles of the knight group, but it was definitely not the people in front of them. "Young master!" The old man's hands were tied behind his back, and his legs were injured. He couldn't stand up, but he crawled towards the unconscious man. Han Jin's heart suddenly jumped. The old man's cry reminded him that when he had just arrived in this world, Stillbird had also called him with the same sad voice. But he didn't want to meddle in other people's business, so he could only turn his eyes elsewhere. "Young master!" The old man let out a blood-sobbing cry. He finally crawled to the man's side and kept pushing and bumping him, trying to wake him up. However, the man had been injured and forced to escape here. He was like a lamp that had run out of oil. Moreover, he had been punched several times by the wooden golem. It was impossible for him to wake up in a short period of time. "Old man, why bother?" A knight laughed and said, "You'd better come with us to see the Castellan. You are all a group of beasts." The old man's eyes almost popped out, and he roared with all his strength. "What did you say?" The knight's face turned cold. "Yukito, how did the Castellan treat you? Without the Castellan's care, you wouldn't be alive today." The old man was not afraid at all. "But how did you treat the Castellan and the young master?" "Old man, the Castellan said that he wanted the Leger alive, but he didn't say that he would let you live. I let you go with us for the sake of the young master. Do you understand?" The knight said gloomily, "You dare to scold me again?" The knight's tone was tough, but his words revealed his fear. First, he said the word young master, and then he left a way out for both sides. The old man knelt on the ground and sat up with his head supporting his body. He sneered, "Yukido, have you forgotten how you flatter the castellan and the young master? Ha! You're just like a dog that can wag its tail. To a guy like you, let alone once, even if I scold you 10 times, so what? Bastard, bastard, bastard." The knight's face turned livid, and he suddenly rushed to the old man with his spear. The old man became more and more tough at the last moment, and he kept scolding until the knight's spear pierced his mouth and came out from the back of his neck. His scolding stopped abruptly. Bah! The knight spat with hatred, and then shook the knight's spear hard, and the old man's body was thrown out of the knight's spear. Chi Li's eyes were full of tears. The old man's loyalty and bravery moved her from the bottom of her heart. Thinking of the guards who died together with a human-faced eagle to protect her, Chi Li almost cried out. Chapter 77. Yukido turned his horse around and was about to go back when he met the eyes of Hanjin and the others at the door. Hanjin and the others kept the bottom line of not making trouble. But it was another thing to judge Yukido. The old man had made it clear before his death that this knight, named Yukido, was an ungrateful bastard. Therefore, everyone looked at him with contempt. Yukido understood the eyes of Hanjin and the others, and could not help but become bold. To be honest, he didn't have much courage. In this chaotic world, he only wanted to make a living. His previous master had refused to obey the city lord's orders and had been killed on the spot. For the sake of his own future, it was understandable that he would change his master's allegiance. The problem was that he could either be a good person or a bad person. It required a certain amount of ability and wisdom to be a two-faced person. Otherwise, it was easy to make mistakes. If he wanted to be a good person, he would have taken the young master away. Although the life of a fugitive was not easy, it was much better than being condemned by his conscience every day. If he wanted to be a bad person, he would have torn off all his disguises and killed the old steward. How could there be so many troubles? And the young master Leger would have had no chance to escape. It turned out that wavering was the worst attitude. Yukido had no one to complain to. Why? He didn't want to go too far. He wanted to be nice to the young master, but the young master took the opportunity to slip away. He didn't want to kill the old steward. After all, he had tried to please the old steward, but he was scolded and lost his face. How could he command these knight in the future? Now, seeing that even some villagers dared to show contempt to him, Yukido could not control himself anymore. He shouted, "Why are you hiding in this place sneakily? Are you spies of the Black Raven City?" Hanjin and the others were stunned. How could they cause trouble without saying anything? Before they could explain, Yukido waved his hand. "Come on, catch them all." Several knights rushed over. Seeing the fighter badge on Morrison's chest, he was a little scared. He whispered to Yukido, "Sir," that Yukido slapped him in the face and roared, "Carry out the order." The knight gritted his teeth and threw caution to the wind. He raised his knight's gun and pointed at Hanjin and the others. He shouted, "Put down your weapons, or you will be responsible for the consequences. Do you hear me? Put down your weapons." Hanjin let out a long sigh. This was too outrageous. There were all kinds of reasons before, but what about now? Morrison's and the others all focused on Hanjin. First, he helped Morrison's and the others with various magic. Then, he voluntarily put himself in danger in exchange for their safety. Finally, he put forward a clear goal or an ideal. Although the ideal was far from reality, it pointed out the direction of their efforts. Again and again, Hanjin's position in everyone's mind was unshakable. Hanjin raised his head and looked at the knight named Yukido. He said word by word, F*CKU. What? Yukido was stunned. You're really an idiot. Every time you hear someone curse you, you always want them to repeat it several times. Do you like it? Hanjin said in a sarcastic tone. Well, I'll satisfy you. F*CKU. Morrison's walked forward slowly with a grim smile on his face. He looked at the other knight coldly. His greatsword was ready to be unsheathed at any time. Sunir sighed, stepped back, jumped on the roof, and took off her longbow. Sassu held his magic wand and cast a magic shield on himself, waiting for the battle to break out. Stillberg, Michel, and the others disappeared as fast as they could and hid in the cellar. Although Han Jin's team didn't have its own discipline, they had formed a style. At least they knew what they should do and where they should be. This time was different from the last time. The knight they met last time belonged to the elite troops of the Holy Crown City, including the Great Knight. They were no match for them at all. However, the knight in front of them was much weaker than them. To put it bluntly, they were only responsible for escorting the supplies. Yukito was trembling with anger. He knew that he was too reckless just now. He didn't see the fighter badge on the chest of the enemy until now. But at this point, there was no other way to solve the problem except to fight. The horse under Yukito snorted uneasily. It was purely a coincidence that the horse's hoof stepped on the unconscious man. The man groaned and opened his eyes. He saw a group of knight approaching slowly with spears in their hands. On the other side, there was Han Jin with a sneer and Morrison's with a greatsword. Then he lost consciousness again. "Go!" Yukito roared angrily. Just then, a strong arrow appeared silently and shot into Yukito's back and out of his chest, bringing out a rain of blood. Yukito looked at the arrow cluster with an unbelievable look and then fell down from the horse. Han Jin was stunned. When did Sunir's archery become so artistic? How could she kill the enemy from the back with a sharp turn? He turned to look at Sunir on the roof ridge and saw a pair of eyes full of shock and nervousness. A group of black things swooped down from the sky. Those creatures looked like bats, but were much bigger than bats. Their wings were 3 meters long, and their pupils were red, emitting a faint red light. They looked very horrible and had sharp fangs in their mouths. Those creatures suddenly folded their wings and fell down one by one. They fell among the night and turned into hideous humanoid creatures. They all had long and thin nails, which looked soft but were actually very sharp. With a scratch, the knights' armors were torn apart like paper. At the same time, their bodies were torn apart. Even the horses couldn't escape. Streams of blood splashed everywhere. Countless pieces of flesh and internal organs fell to the ground like raindrops. The whole village turned into a slaughterhouse in an instant. Those monsters harvested lives like a farmer harvesting crops. They stepped on the squeaking flesh and wore the blood of one life or another. Every time they turned, there would be drops of blood thrown out by them. The knight who had been swaggering a moment ago had now become a group of lambs waiting to be slaughtered. But what Han Jin didn't understand was that although those knights were on the verge of total collapse, they still kept fighting. In fact, it was not that they didn't want to escape, but they knew that they couldn't escape at all. God, it's Segun's vampire guard. Morrison's face had turned pale. Chapter 78. A few black figures strolled through the bloody street. They all had pointed ears, which indicated what race they were from. However, compared to Sunir, their temperament was completely different. They had black hair, black pupils, black soft armor, and even the slanted longbows on their backs. Their bodies were filled with a thick, insoluble darkness. However, their faces were very pale, which made them look frightening against the black background. The leading elf walked to Yukito's body, bent down, and searched for a moment. She found a crystal seal. She smiled and glanced to the side. Her eyes fell on Sunir, who was standing on the roof. She said softly, "Sunir, we meet again." The Bite Man Knight had all been killed. The vampires were still not satisfied. They were about to attack the Morrisons who were guarding the door. However, they stopped when they heard the elf talking to Yukito. "Why are you here?" Sunir asked coldly. "Do you remember the Silver Pegasus army from 20 years ago? We are learning from you." The elf smiled. "Isn't Segund known as omnipotent? Does he need to learn from others?" Sunir sneered. "Your tone is very unfriendly." The elf sighed. "Although I don't want to blame you, you have to understand that you can't be forgiven every time. If you can't control your tongue, you will bring disaster to yourself Sunir snorted, but she didn't retort. Obviously, her side was at a disadvantage, so Sunir didn't want to provoke a conflict. I can feel the hostility in your heart. Why do you have to do this? The elf said softly. Actually, Master Zagund is not as bad as you think, and Dismark is not as good as you think. Dismark is our ally after all, Sunir said lightly. What a good ally! The elf smiled. 20 years ago, Lord Kassa gained the loyalty of several red dragons, but he was killed by Dismark in the end. Everyone knew that if the Silver Pegasus army and the elf team didn't go deep into the rear of Kassa's army and attack them at all costs, Dismark would have lost in the end. But what did you get in return after making such a heavy sacrifice? Sunir suddenly became silent. According to the agreement, you should have divided Kassa's territory equally, but Dismark took more than 80% of the land. He only left some wilderness for you. Kassa had operated in Anqing for decades and left behind a large amount of wealth and military resources. Dismark took them all. The elf smiled. The funniest thing is that if Dismark wasn't busy expanding his territory and instead chose to lead his army to the west and attack Master Zagund with Wild Willow City, would there still be a war like this? This time, Wild Willow City rejected Dismark's request for help. I personally agree with this decision. There is no need to cooperate with this kind of person. Sunir still didn't say anything. Her face was hidden behind a mask, so no one could see the change in her expression. But one could imagine that her face wasn't good right now. There are no eternal enemies in this world. The elf smiled. Master Zagund appreciates your attitude. I think now is the time for us to try to be friends. Friends? Ha! Sunir was so angry that she laughed. How many of our people did Zagund kill? Can we forget all of that? Didn't you also kill our people? The elf slowly said. Don't be as short-sighted as Dismark. You need to look further. If I thought that I could be friends with you, then I would be truly short-sighted. Sunir sneered. Right now, Zagund has to fight against Dismark while also preparing to deal with the Beatman's counterattack. That's why he's worried that Wild Willow City will take advantage of the chaos to send troops, right? After this moment, who would he still want to be friends with? Hazel, don't waste your time talking with them. Leave it to me. A vampire walked over with an evil grin. Don't meddle. The elf frowned. Our mission is to destroy the Beatman supplies. The vampire froze for a moment, then angrily said, Hazel, are you ordering me? A cold light flashed in Hazel's eyes, but she was very apprehensive about the identity of these vampires. In the end, she helplessly sighed, turned around, and walked back. The elves hurriedly followed behind her. The vampire coldly looked at Hazel's back. Then he waved his hand and said, Kill them for me. His voice was very loud, as if he was trying to show off to Hazel. The group of vampires rushed forward like a swarm of bees. Morrison's angrily roared and released his Do Chi to protect himself. At this time, he could only fight to the death. All of a sudden, something exploded in midair. Rays of golden light shot out like countless arrows, sweeping across the surrounding space of several hundred meters. The vampire's charge came to an abrupt halt. Shrill screams rang out one after another. Two vampires even fell to the ground. Their arms waved frantically as they tried to shield themselves. It seemed like they were resisting the rays of golden light that could penetrate through every orifice. The golden light dissipated. The appearance of the vampires had changed drastically. Countless wounds that looked like ulcers appeared on their skin. There was also a black, sticky liquid flowing out of them. Han Jean slowly walked out from behind Morrison's. His face looked calm and composed, but his heart was in turmoil. He knew the power of the Pure Light spell. If the Pure Light spell was used to attack the spirits he released, it could instantly turn them into ashes. However, the performance of these vampires was too shocking. They were only slightly injured and still had a strong combat ability. We don't want to be friends with you, but we also don't want to be enemies with you, Han Jean said coldly. Before I change my mind, get out of here. Otherwise, I don't mind cleaning up this world. The vampires and the elves were companions, but they could turn angry over such a small matter. It could be seen that their personalities were very tyrannical. When dealing with such creatures, it was useless to lay out facts and reason. If you had overwhelming power, they would give in even if you didn't say anything. Master, Master Hazel, the leader of the vampires hurriedly called out. The vampires involuntarily took a few steps back. They were not afraid of warriors or magicians, but priests were their natural enemies. Besides, Han Jin's words were very firm. They thought that the priest in front of them really did not want to hurt them and was only giving them a light punishment. If they continued to attack, the priest would definitely release a powerful spell. Hazel turned around and looked at Han Jin seriously. He smiled, then continued to walk out of the village, ignoring the vampires. "Let's go," the leader of the vampires said hatefully. Without the elven archers to solve their problems, they could only turn into ashes in the holy light. It was a very foolish choice to insist on fighting the priest. Chapter 81. Only caring about killing and not burying, this kind of behavior was really outrageous. Looking at the bloody scene in front of them, Han Jin and the others were a little worried. Stilberg, Michel, and little Joseph didn't look too good. Such a cruel scene wasn't something they could encounter at any time. At least, it was definitely the first time for Michel and little Joseph. Even Sassu and Morrison's looked worried. Only Han Jin and Sunir were able to keep calm. Han Jin slowly walked to the bloody scene and pushed aside the dismembered corpses. The man called Leger was revealed. Han Jin bent down and carefully observed for a moment. He was still breathing, and his pulse was light but stable. Han Jin couldn't help but sigh. This kid, his luck couldn't be any better. One had to know that Leger still had 2 arrows stuck in his back. The scene just now was extremely chaotic. People were running, horses were jumping, and the vampires were also rushing to kill. If anything had kicked the arrows, it would have torn open Leger's wounds. The fact that Leger was able to survive could only be attributed to luck. "Morrisons, come and help me." Han Jin waved his hand and called out. He didn't want to cause trouble earlier, but if he didn't help now, he would feel bad. Although he didn't know Leger well, he had a feeling that they were in the same boat. They were both young masters in dire straits, and both had a loyal servant. It was just that he was a little luckier, living in a small town without any powerful enemies. That was why he was able to protect himself and Stilberg. If the roles were reversed, he could only stretch his neck and wait for death. What was that sour remark about? We're both in the same boat. Why should we have known each other before? That kid isn't dead? Moxink was also surprised. Then he strode into the room. He didn't feel anything when he was outside, but after entering the room, he had a totally different feeling. No matter how careful he was, he would step on something soft, slippery, or sticky, which made his scalp tingle. With every step he took, the muscles on his face would twitch, and he even had the impulse to shout out loud in his heart. The 2 men lifted Leger and rushed out as if they were escaping. They found a clean place and gently put Leger down. Morrisons looked at Leger's wounds and whispered, "Can you save him?" "No problem," Han Ji nodded. "His body is very strong. If it was someone else, it would be hard to say." Morrisons rubbed his hands. He seemed very happy. Of course, he was happy for himself. As a warrior, this kind of thing was inevitable. If Han Jin could save Leger, he would be able to save Morrisons in the future. It was a strong guarantee. Sunir jumped down from the roof. "The vampires are heading for the barracks. We can't stay here. Everyone pack up. We're leaving now." "What kind of luck is this?" Sassu smiled bitterly. Morrisons and the others looked at each other, speechless. God knows what kind of influence they had. Anyway, they couldn't live a peaceful life. At most, they could rest for a few months. After that, they would have to run away because of various reasons. "This is our fate. Accept it," Han Jin said calmly. He always kept his ideological and political work in mind. From the current situation, this team was relatively stable. Morrisons, Sunir, and Sassu could be said to be good people. They didn't scheme against each other and had a tacit understanding with each other. Of course, they also had their shortcomings. The first one that needed to be addressed was their lack of ambition. Therefore, he had to persuade them at all times. Fate. Morrison smacked his lips and fell in a deep thought. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk usually. Everyone would put their important things in Sunir and Hanjin space rings, so there wasn't much to pack. After a while, everyone walked out of the village. Fortunately, the village was in the mountains, so they could retreat into the mountains at any time. Hanjin had already dug out the arrow from Reg's back. Though he had never been a surgeon, he had some basic knowledge, such as disinfection, etc. The mantra of rending and the secrets of Lu Ding Six Ding was a spell used to treat wounds caused by knives and weapons, so there was no need to worry about bleeding and pain relief. Although it was already the beginning of spring, the night wind was still very cold. After walking for about 10 miles, Chi Li, Michelle, and the others couldn't stand it anymore. They were shivering as they walked. Seeing this, Sunir found a valley to hide from the wind and led everyone in. When the bonfire started burning, everyone sat around it to warm themselves. Morrison's tried to find something to talk about. Sunir, didn't you say that elves and dark elves are mortal enemies? Why didn't they fight just now? Do you really want to fight? Hanjin was both angry and amused. No, I just feel that it's a little strange. Mortal enemies? Sunir chewed on these two words and sighed. Morrisons, if you had brothers and sisters, would you be mortal enemies with them? Of course not. Actually, we are all children of the forest. Although there are conflict between us, and the conflict are getting worse and worse, to the point where it can't be fixed, but how do I put it? Sunir paused. You don't understand. Every time I kill a dark elf, I have a very strange feeling in my heart, as if I have committed an unforgivable crime. You've killed dark elves before? Morrison's was shocked. How many did you kill? I can't remember. Similarly, I can't remember how many of my people have died in the war. You can't remember? Morrison shivered and muttered, I really can't tell. It would be fine if she couldn't remember other things, but she couldn't even remember how many people she had killed. Just thinking about it made him tremble in fear. Remember, it's war, Sunir said coldly. I know, I didn't say anything. Morrison smiled. Right, Sunir, that dark elf called Hazel said that they're learning from you. What does that mean? Sasu interrupted. 20 years ago, the Silver Pegasus army penetrated deep into the rear of the Casa army and attacked everywhere. They destroyed a large amount of supplies and severely affected the Casa army's movements. Sunir said indifferently. Now you know what it means, right? You're saying that Zagun sent out his vampire guard and dark elves? Sasu jumped up. More or less. It's over. Sasu's face turned pale. Zagun's army had a special characteristic. They would stop at nothing. The Silver Pegasus army penetrated deep into the enemy's rear and only attacked military targets and troops. The vampires, on the other hand, were monsters that lived for destruction and slaughter. Their arrival would definitely turn this place into a world of misery and suffering. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.